In the snowbound Ravenwood Manor, Hercule Poirot faces a web of deceit where every guest hides a secret. When blackmail notes surface and bodies fall first, a war-scarred major, then a glamorous actress, Poirot's little grey cells unravel. A chilling plot. Clara, the enigmatic heiress, orchestrates a deadly game to seize the estate, but her lies crumble under Poirot's relentless pursuit of truth. Murder, betrayal, and a hidden heir collide in this gripping Agatha Christie style mystery where only one detective can outwit a killer before the storm clears. Chapter 1. The invitation to Ravenwood Manor. The winter of 1928 was a bitter one, and Hercule Poirot, the diminutive Belgian detective with a penchant for order and a moustache that rivaled the grandeur of a Renaissance painting, found himself restless in his London flat. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting shadows across the neatly arranged room, but Poirot's mind was far from the cosy warmth. His latest case, a trivial matter of a stolen diamond brooch, had been resolved with such ease that it left him craving a challenge worthy of his little grey cells. He adjusted his tie, a perfect silk knot, and sighed, gazing out at the frost-kissed streets of Mayfair. It was then that the postman's knock interrupted his reverie. George, his ever-efficient valet, entered with a silver tray bearing a single envelope, its cream paper embossed with a crest that spoke of old money and older secrets. Poirot's eyes gleamed as he took it, noting the elegant handwriting addressed to Monsieur Hercule Poirot, Esq. The letter was from Lady Beatrice Langley, a name that stirred faint memories of society columns and whispered scandals. My dear Monsieur Poirot, I write to you in a matter of utmost urgency and delicacy. My family is to gather this weekend at Ravenwood Manor, our estate in Hertfordshire, to celebrate the engagement of my son, Edward, to Miss Clara Wentworth. While this should be a joyous occasion, I fear a shadow looms over our house. There are secrets, dangerous ones, that threaten to unravel all we hold dear. I have heard of your remarkable talents, and I implore you to join us. Your presence may prevent a calamity. Discretion, of course, is paramount. Yours sincerely, Beatrice Langley. Moustache twitched as he folded the letter. A shadow looms, he murmured, savouring the phrase. And where there are shadows, mon ami, there are lies. He turned to George, who stood patiently by the door. Prepare my travelling case, George. We depart for Hertfordshire tomorrow. The journey to Ravenwood Manor was a study in contrasts. London's bustle gave way to the quiet lanes of the countryside, where bare trees stood like sentinels against the grey sky. Poirot, bundled in a woolen overcoat, sat in the back of a hired motor car, his gloved hands folded over a walking stick. The driver, a taciturn man named Jenkins, navigated the winding roads with practised ease, though he cast curious glances at his passenger through the rearview mirror. Monsieur Jenkins, Poirot said, breaking the silence, you know this? Ravenwood Manor, yes. Aye, sir, Jenkins replied, his voice rough as gravel. Old place, grand but eerie. Been in the Langley family for generations. Folks say it's got more secrets than rooms. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And the Langleys, what do the folks say of them? Jenkins hesitated, then shrugged. Rich as Croesus, but troubled. Lady Beatrice runs the show since her husband passed. Young Edward's a bit wild, they say. And that fiancé of his, Miss Wentworth, turned up out of nowhere with a fortune and no past to speak of. Tongueswag, sir, indeed, Poirot said, filing the information away. Gossip, while crude, often held kernels of truth, and Poirot was adept at sifting through it. The car crested a hill, and Ravenwood Manor came into view. It was a sprawling Gothic pile, its stone facade weathered but imposing, with ivy clinging to its towers like a lover's embrace. The windows glinted in the weak afternoon light, and a thin plume of smoke rose from the chimneys. As the car rolled up the gravel drive, Poirot noted the manicured lawns, now dusted with snow, and the Rottian gates that creaked ominously in the wind. A butler, tall and gaunt, with a face like a funeral mask, greeted Poirot at the entrance. "Monsieur Poirot, I presume," he intoned, his voice as cold as the air. "I am Hargreaves. Lady Beatrice awaits you in the drawing-room." Poirot followed Hargreaves through a grand hall lined with portraits, their eyes seeming to follow him. The air was heavy with the scent of polished wood and old roses, and the silence was broken only by the distant ticking of a grandfather clock. They passed a library, its shelves groaning with leather-bound volumes, and a dining-room set with crystal and silver. Finally, Hargreaves opened a door to a drawing-room where a fire roared, casting a warm glow over the assembled company. Lady Beatrice Langley rose to greet him. She was a woman of 60, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, her eyes sharp despite the lines of worry etched into her face. Her navy silk dress rustled as she extended a hand. "Monsieur Poirot, you are most welcome. Your presence brings me hope." "Madame," Poirot said, bowing slightly, "I am at your service. But pray, tell me, what is this shadow you fear?" Beatrice glanced at the others in the room, her lips tightening. "Not here," she whispered. "We shall speak privately after dinner. For now, allow me to introduce you." The room held a small but eclectic group. Edward Langley, the heir, was a handsome man in his early 30s, with dark hair and a smile that was both charming and calculated. He lounged by the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in hand, his eyes flickering with amusement as he sized up Poirot. "So, you're the famous detective," he said. "Mother's got you here to play watchdog, has she?" "Edward, please," Beatrice said sharply, then turned to Poirot. "My son is spirited, but he means no offence." Clara Wentworth, Edward's fiancée, stood by the window, her auburn hair catching the firelight. She was strikingly beautiful, with high cheekbones, and green eyes that seemed to hold secrets. Her emerald gown was the height of fashion, but her hands twisted nervously in her lap. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice soft but steady, "I've read of your cases. I hope you find our little gathering less eventful." Poirot smiled. "Mademoiselle, with Hercule Poirot, the eventful is often inevitable." Next was Major Harold Grayson, a broad-shouldered man with a military bearing and a face scarred by war and time. His grey eyes were hard, and he gripped his cane as if it were a weapon. "I don't hold with detectives," he growled. "No offence, sir, but I trust my own judgment." "No offence is taken," Major Poirot replied smoothly. "Judgment is a fine thing, but facts are finer." Sylvia Marlowe, an actress whose name Poirot recognized from West End playbills, reclined on a chaise longue, her blonde curls artfully arranged. She wore a scarlet dress that clung to her curves, and her laugh was as bright as it was calculated. "Oh, Monsieur Poirot, you're positively droll," she said, fluttering her lashes. "I do hope you'll keep us entertained." Finally, Dr. Victor Ramsay, a thin man with spectacles and a nervous tic, hovered near the drinks trolley. His hands trembled slightly as he poured a sherry, and his eyes darted to Clara before returning to Poirot. "A pleasure, sir," he mumbled. "I'm just the family physician here too. Well, keep everyone healthy." Poirot's gaze swept the room, noting every detail. Edward's casual arrogance, Clara's guarded posture, Grayson's hostility, Sylvia's flirtation, Ramsay's unease, and Beatrice, watching them all like a hawk. A most interesting company, he said aloud. I look forward to our weekend. Dinner was a lavish affair, served in a dining room dominated by a chandelier that glittered like a constellation. The conversation was polite but strained, with undercurrents of tension. Edward teased Clara about her mysterious past, prompting a sharp look from Beatrice. Grayson muttered about family squabbles and drained his wine. Sylvia regaled the table with tales of her latest play, but her eyes kept straying to Edward. Ramsay said little, his fork scraping nervously against his plate, as the dessert course was cleared. Clara rose, her face pale. I must speak, she said, her voice trembling. I'm being blackmailed. Someone here knows something about my past and threatens to ruin me. She swayed, and Edward caught her arm, his expression darkening. Blackmail, Beatrice said, her voice icy. Who dares? Clara shook her head. I don't know. I received a note this morning, slipped under my door. It demands money or silence. Poirot leaned forward, his eyes bright. Mademoiselle, may I see? This note. Clara hesitated, then produced a folded paper from her reticule. Poirot unfolded it, reading aloud, Pay £10,000, or your secret will destroy you. Tell no one, or worse will follow. The handwriting was neat, but unremarkable, the paper plain. Poirot tucked it into his pocket. This is most serious, he said. But fear not, mademoiselle. Hercule Poirot will uncover the truth. The evening took a darker turn when a snowstorm descended, blanketing the manor in white and cutting off the road to the village. As the guests retired, a scream pierced the silence. Poirot, still in the drawing-room, hurried toward the sound, finding the others converging on the servants' quarters. There, Emily, Clara's maid, lay unconscious on the floor, a torn letter clutched in her hand. Dr. Ramsay knelt beside her, checking her pulse. She's alive, Ramsay said, his voice shaking. A blow to the head, but she'll recover. Poirot examined the letter, its edges ragged. Only a fragment remained. The truth of Ravenwood. He straightened, his mind racing. Mies, Amos, he said, this is no mere weekend gathering. We are in the midst of a deadly game of lies. As the guests dispersed, their faces etched with fear or suspicion, Poirot stood alone in the hall, the torn letter in his hand. The firelight flickered, casting shadows that danced like spectres. He knew the game had begun, and only his little grey cells could unravel the web of deceit before it claimed another victim. The manor seemed to hold its breath, its secrets locked within its walls, waiting for Poirot to uncover them. He retired to his room, but sleep eluded him. Instead, he began his mind map, a mental tapestry of clues and connections, knowing that somewhere in this house a liar was playing a dangerous game. Hercule Poirot was determined to win. Chapter 2. The gathering storm. The train rattled through the English countryside, its rhythmic clatter a soothing counterpoint to the flurry of thoughts in Hercule Poirot's mind. The fields beyond the window were dusted with the first snow of winter, a pristine blanket that seemed to mock the tangled web of secrets hinted at in Lady Beatrice Langley's urgent letter. Poirot adjusted his neatly pressed lapel, his gloved fingers lingering on the crisp envelope tucked inside his coat. The invitation to Ravenwood Manor had been formal, yet its tone carried an undercurrent of desperation, a plea for his presence at a weekend gathering to celebrate her son Edward's engagement. But it was the postscript, scrawled in Beatrice's elegant hand, that had piqued his interest. "There are matters here that require your discretion, Monsieur Poirot. I fear a shadow looms over our family." Poirot's moustache twitched as he considered the implications. A shadow, indeed. Families, like the Langleys, steeped in wealth and tradition, often harbored secrets as old as their estates. Ravenwood Manor, he recalled from his inquiries, was a sprawling Georgian pile nestled in the remote hills of Yorkshire, its isolation both a charm and a potential stage for mischief. The engagement of Edward Langley to Clara Wentworth, a heiress of considerable fortune, was the ostensible reason for the gathering. But Poirot suspected the true purpose lay in that cryptic postscript. His little grey cells, as he fondly called them, were already stirring, eager to unravel the threads of deceit. The train slowed as it approached a small windswept station, its platform nearly deserted, save for a lone figure in a heavy overcoat. Poirot disembarked, his polished shoes crunching on the frosty ground, and was greeted by the Langley family's driver, a taciturn man named Jenkins, who tipped his cap with practised deference. The journey to Ravenwood Manor was a winding one, the motor car navigating narrow lanes flanked by skeletal trees, their branches clawing at the darkening sky. Snow began to fall in earnest, soft flakes swirling in the headlights, and Poirot felt a prickle of unease. Isolation, he mused, was both a shield and a trap. Ravenwood Manor loomed into view as the car crested a hill, its silhouette stark against the gathering storm. The house was a study in grandeur, its stone facade adorned with ivy, its tall windows glowing with warm light that promised respite from the cold. Jenkins pulled up to the entrance, where a butler stiff-backed and impeccably dressed to usher Poirot inside. The hall was a cavernous space, its walls lined with portraits of stern-faced Langleys, their eyes seeming to follow him as he surrendered his coat and hat. The air carried the scent of polished wood and beeswax, undercut by a faint whiff of something less tangible, tension perhaps, or fear. Lady Beatrice Langley descended the grand staircase, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, her emerald gown rustling softly. She was a woman of late middle age, her features sharp yet softened by a warmth that seemed genuine, if strained. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, extending a hand adorned with a single sapphire ring, "I cannot thank you enough for coming this weekend. It is more important than I can express." Poirot bowed, his eyes never leaving her face. "Madame, it is always a pleasure to assist, but I sense there is more to this gathering than a celebration of young love, n'est-ce pas?" Her smile faltered, and she glanced toward the closed doors of the drawing-room, from which came the murmur of voices. "You are perceptive, as always. Let us join the others, and perhaps you will see for yourself." The drawing-room was a blaze of opulence, its chandelier casting prisms of light across mahogany furniture and heavy velvet drapes. The guests, an eclectic assembly, turned as Poirot entered, their expressions ranging from curiosity to guarded suspicion. Beatrice made the introductions with practised grace, though Poirot noted the slight tremor in her voice. Edward Langley, the heir to Ravenwood, was a tall man in his early 30s, with the easy charm of one accustomed to admiration. His dark hair was impeccably styled, his smile disarming, yet Poirot detected a flicker of unease in his blue eyes. Beside him stood Clara Wentworth, his fiancée, a striking woman with auburn hair and a porcelain complexion. Her emerald eyes held a guarded quality, as though she were perpetually assessing her surroundings. She greeted Poirot with a polite nod. but her fingers tightened briefly on Edward's arm, a gesture that did not escape the detective's notice. Major Harold Grayson, a retired military man with a weathered face and a limp, offered a curt handshake. His grey mustache bristled as he spoke, his voice carrying the clipped authority of a man used to command. "Heard of you, Poirot," he said gruffly. "Hope you're not here to stir up trouble." "Trouble, Major, is not my aim," Poirot replied smoothly, "but it has a way of finding those who hide from it." Sylvia Marlowe, a celebrated actress whose star had begun to wane, swept forward with a theatrical flourish. Her blonde curls bounced as she extended a gloved hand, her smile as dazzling as it was calculated. "Monsieur Poirot, what a delight. I've seen you mentioned in the papers. Quite the sleuth, aren't you?" Her voice was honeyed, but her eyes darted toward Clara, a flash of rivalry betraying her charm. The final guest, Dr. Victor Ramsay, was a slight man with thinning hair and a nervous habit of adjusting his spectacles. He mumbled a greeting, his hands fidgeting with a pocket watch. "I'm just the family physician," he said, almost apologetically. "Here to, well, keep everyone healthy, I suppose." Poirot inclined his head, committing each face to memory. A charming heir, a secretive heiress, a gruff veteran, a scheming actress, and a nervous doctor each, he suspected, held a piece of the puzzle Beatrice had summoned him to solve. The group settled into conversation, their voices mingling with the crackle of the fire. But Poirot remained alert, observing the subtle dynamics. Edward's hand lingered on Clara's, but she seemed distracted, her gaze flickering toward the window as the snow thickened outside. Major Grayson's grumbling about modern nonsense clashed with Sylvia's airy laughter, while Dr. Ramsay hovered on the fringes, his unease palpable. Dinner was announced, and the party moved to the dining room, where a long table gleamed with silver and crystal. The meal was lavish roast pheasant, creamed potatoes, and a rich claret, but the atmosphere was strained. Beatrice presided at the head of the table, her attempts at light conversation faltering as silences grew heavy. Poirot, seated between Sylvia and Dr. Ramsay, noted the glances exchanged across the table, Edward's reassuring smile to Clara, Grayson's scowl at Edward, Sylvia's coy glances at everyone. It was then that the butler, a man named Collins, approached Beatrice with a folded piece of paper. Her face paled as she read it, and she quickly tucked it into her sleeve. Poirot's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing, instead engaging Sylvia in a discussion of her latest theatrical role. She obliged with a dramatic recounting, her voice carrying over the clink of cutlery, but Poirot's attention was divided. The note, he was certain, was no trivial matter. As dessert was served a delicate lemon soufflé, the wind howled outside, rattling the windows. Collins reappeared, his expression grim. "My lady, the snow has blocked the roads. It seems we are cut off from the village until morning." A murmur of dismay rippled through the guests, though Poirot noted that Clara's reaction was curiously muted, as though she had expected this development. Beatrice forced a smile. "We are well provisioned, and Ravenwood is a fortress against the storm. Let us retire to the drawing-room for coffee." The group reconvened by the fire, but the mood had shifted. The isolation of the manor, once a romantic notion, now felt oppressive. Poirot sipped his coffee, his senses attuned to the undercurrents. It was Sylvia who broke the silence, her voice teasing but edged with malice. "Well, Clara, you must be thrilled to be trapped here with us all. No secrets can stay hidden in a place like this, can they?" Clara's smile was tight. "I've nothing to hide, Sylvia. Unlike some I don't live for the spotlight." The barb landed, and Sylvia's eyes flashed, but before she could retort, Dr. Ramsay spilled his coffee, his hands trembling. "Oh, clumsy me," he muttered, dabbing at the stain with a napkin. Poirot watched him closely, noting the beads of sweat on his brow despite the chill. It was then that Edward, perhaps seeking to diffuse the tension, suggested a game of cards. The group agreed, though Poirot declined, preferring to observe. As the cards were dealt, he wandered to the sideboard, where a silver tray held an assortment of decanters. His gaze fell on a small, folded paper tucked beneath a glass another note, identical in size to the one Beatrice had received. With a discreet movement, he slipped it into his pocket and returned to his seat. Later, when the guests had retired to their rooms, Poirot sat by the fire in his guest chamber, the note unfolded before him. Its message was brief but chilling. "Lies that kill will be exposed tonight." The handwriting was neat, deliberate, and unfamiliar. Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled, his mind racing. The storm outside raged on, mirroring the turmoil within Ravenwood Manor. Someone, he was certain, was playing a dangerous game, and he would need all his wits to unmask them before the lies turned deadly. The night stretched on, the manor creaking under the weight of the snow. Poirot's thoughts returned to the guests, each a potential player in this drama. Edward, with his charm and hidden unease. Clara, whose guarded eyes hinted at a past she wished to conceal. Grayson, whose gruff demeanor masked a deeper grudge. Sylvia, whose theatricality could be a facade for cunning. And Ramsay, whose nervousness suggested more than mere social awkwardness. And then there was Beatrice, the matriarch, whose summons had brought him here. What secret did she fear, and who among this company was desperate enough to kill to protect it? Poirot rose, adjusting his tie with precision. He would begin his investigation in earnest come morning, but for now he would listen to the manor, to its whispers and its silences. The game of lies had begun, and Hercule Poirot was determined to win. Chapter 3. The First Deception. The dining room of Ravenwood Manor gleamed under the soft glow of the chandelier, its crystal prisms casting delicate patterns across the polished mahogany table. The heavy velvet drapes were drawn against the howling snowstorm outside, sealing the room in an intimate, almost claustrophobic warmth. Hercule Poirot sat at the far end of the table, his small, precise hands folded neatly in his lap, his dark eyes darting from face to face, observing the assembled company with the keen interest of a scientist studying a particularly volatile chemical reaction. Lady Beatrice Langley presided at the head of the table, her silver hair immaculate despite the late hour, her posture rigid, as though carved from the same oak as the manor itself. To her right sat her son, Edward Langley, his boyish charm tempered by a faint crease of worry across his brow. Clara Wentworth, his fiancée, sat beside him, her delicate features framed by a cascade of auburn curls, though her green eyes flickered with something Poirot could not yet name: fear, perhaps, or defiance. Major Harold Grayson, his weathered face etched with lines of discontent, slumped slightly in his chair, his military bearing at odds with the glass of whiskey he clutched. Sylvia Marlowe, the actress, radiated a practiced elegance, her crimson lips curved in a smile that never quite reached her eyes. And Dr. Victor Ramsay, the family friend, fidgeted with his napkin, his thin frame seeming to shrink under the weight of the room's tension. The meal had been a sumptuous affair: roast pheasant, glazed carrots, and a veloute sauce that Poirot, a man of refined tastes, had privately deemed passable but not exceptional. The conversation, however, was far less palatable. It had begun with pleasantries, as such gatherings often do. But the air was thick with unspoken grievances, and Poirot's sharp ears caught the undercurrents of discord beneath the polite banter. "Clara," my dear Lady Beatrice said, her voice smooth but edged with a maternal authority. "You've been awfully quiet this evening. Are you quite well?" Clara's fork paused midway to her mouth, a sliver of pheasant trembling on the tines. She set it down with deliberate care, her smile tight. "Quite well, thank you, Lady Beatrice. Merely savouring the meal." "Savouring, are you, Major?" Grayson's gruff voice cut through the room like a blunt knife. "You've barely touched your plate. Something on your mind, girl?" Poirot's moustache twitched slightly, a sign of his amusement at the Major's lack of tact. Clara's cheeks flushed, but her voice remained steady. "I assure you, Major, my appetite is simply not what it usually is. The journey here was tiring, tiring," Sylvia Marlowe echoed, her tone dripping with mockery. She leaned forward, her sapphire earrings catching the light. "Or perhaps it's the company. Engagements can be so fraught, can't they? All those expectations." Her eyes flicked toward Edward, who stiffened but said nothing. Poirot noted the exchange, his mind already weaving a tapestry of motives. Sylvia's barb was not idle. It carried the weight of familiarity, as though she knew more of Edward's heart than a mere acquaintance should. Edward, for his part, avoided her gaze, focusing instead on his wineglass, which he turned slowly in his hand. "Fraught or not," Edward said at last, his voice light but strained, "Clara and I are delighted to be here, sharing this moment, with family and friends." He reached for Clara's hand, but Poirot observed that her fingers did not curl around his in return. Dr. Ramsay cleared his throat, a nervous habit Poirot had already catalogued. "A toast, then," he said, raising his glass with a tremor, "to Edward and Clara, and to love and truth." The words hung awkwardly in the air, and Poirot's eyes narrowed. Truth, an interesting choice for a man whose hand shook, as though guarding a secret. The toast was echoed half-heartedly, glasses clinking with a hollow sound. It was then that Clara spoke, her voice cutting through the murmurs like a bell. "I'm afraid I must be candid," she said, her gaze sweeping. "The table, someone here, is not what they seem. I've been receiving letters, unpleasant ones. Someone is trying to blackmail me." A collective intake of breath followed, and Poirot leaned forward, his interest piqued. Lady Beatrice's fork clattered against her plate, and Edward's face drained of colour. Sylvia's smile faltered, while Major Grayson let out a bark of laughter that held no humour. "Blackmail," Grayson said, his voice thick with scepticism. "What could anyone possibly have on a slip of a girl like you?" Clara's eyes flashed, but she did not rise to the bait. "That's my business, Major. But I will not be intimidated," I thought. "It only fair to warn everyone, as the sender is likely among us." The room erupted into chaos. Lady Beatrice demanded to know more, her voice sharp with indignation. Edward gripped Clara's arm, whispering urgently, while Sylvia leaned back in her chair, her expression one of detached amusement. Dr. Ramsay's face had gone ashen, his fingers twisting the stem of his glass until Poirot feared it might snap. "Mon dear," Poirot murmured under his breath, his mind racing. Blackmail was a dangerous game, one that required both audacity and intimate knowledge. Who among this company had the means and the motive to wield such a weapon? And why reveal it now, in such a public manner? Clara's announcement was no accident. It was a calculated move, though whether to flush out her tormentor or to deflect. Suspicion, Poirot could not yet say. He raised a hand, his voice calm but commanding. Madame et messieurs, if I may. Mademoiselle Wentworth, these letters, when did they begin, and what do they demand? Clara hesitated, her eyes meeting his for the first time. There was a flicker of calculation there, quickly masked. They began a month ago, she said. They demand money, of course, and silence about certain matters from my past. I won't say more, not yet. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. And you have these letters with you? One of them, she admitted. The others I destroyed. A pity, Poirot said, though his tone suggested he found the destruction more suspicious than regrettable. Might I see this letter? Clara reached into her purse, producing a folded piece of paper. She passed it to Poirot, her hand steady despite the tension in the room. He unfolded it carefully, his eyes scanning the contents. The handwriting was neat, almost mechanical, with no distinguishing flourishes. The message was brief. Pay £10,000, or the truth of your shame will be known to all. Instructions to follow. Interesting, Poirot said, folding the letter and slipping it into his pocket with a smoothness that belied his intent to keep it. And you have no suspicion of the author? None, Clara said, though her eyes darted briefly toward Sylvia, who raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The dinner continued in strained silence, broken only by the clink of cutlery and the occasional gust of wind rattling the windows. Poirot observed each guest in turn, cataloguing their reactions. Lady Beatrice's lips were pressed into a thin line, her maternal instincts warring with her need to maintain decorum. Edward's hand rested protectively on Clara's, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. Sylvia's amusement had hardened into something colder, while Major Grayson's scowl deepened with every sip of whiskey. Dr. Ramsay, meanwhile, seemed on the verge of collapse, his fork trembling as he pushed food around his plate. As the meal drew to a close, Lady Beatrice rose, her voice brittle but composed. I suggest we retire to the drawing-room for coffee. This unpleasantness can be discussed further tomorrow, when we are all rested. The company murmured agreement, though Poirot noted the reluctance in their movements. As they filed out of the dining-room, he lingered, his eyes scanning the table for anything out of place. A napkin, crumpled in an unusual manner, caught his attention. He lifted it, revealing a small scrap of paper tucked beneath. The handwriting matched the blackmail note. Lies will kill tonight. Poirot's pulse quickened, though his expression remained impassive. He pocketed the note and followed the others, his mind already constructing the first threads of his mental tapestry. The storm outside had trapped them all, but it was the storm within Ravenwood Manor that promised to be far more deadly. The drawing-room was a study in opulence, its walls lined with portraits of stern-faced Langleys glaring down at the living. A fire roared in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the room. The guests settled into armchairs and sofas, their faces illuminated by the firelight, each wearing a mask of civility that Poirot knew concealed darker truths. He accepted a cup of coffee from a maid, Emily, Clara's personal attendant, a young woman with mousy brown hair and wide, nervous eyes. Poirot noted her trembling hands as she poured, her gaze darting toward Clara as though seeking approval. Interesting, he thought. A maid so devoted, yet so afraid. The conversation in the drawing room was stilted, the earlier revelation hanging over them like a fog. Sylvia attempted to lighten the mood with a story about her latest theatrical triumph, but her words fell flat, and even she seemed to tire of the effort. Major Grayson, now on his third whiskey, muttered something about damned nonsense, and sank deeper into his chair. Edward and Clara sat close together, their hands entwined. But Poirot observed the subtle distance between them, a stiffness in Clara's posture, a hesitation in Edward's touch. It was then that the scream shattered the room. It came from the hallway, high and piercing, cutting through the murmur of conversation like a blade. The guests froze, their faces a tableau of shock. Poirot was on his feet in an instant, his small frame moving with surprising agility as he strode toward the sound in the hallway. Emily lay crumpled on the floor, her face pale, her eyes closed. A torn piece of paper was clutched in her hand, its edges jagged as though ripped in haste. Clara knelt beside her, her face a mask of concern. Though Poirot noted the careful way she avoided touching the paper, "Emily," Clara cried, her voice trembling. "What's happened?" Dr. Ramsay pushed through the crowd, his medical instincts taking over. He knelt beside the maid, checking her pulse with shaking hands. "She's alive," he said, his voice hoarse. "Unconscious, but her pulse is steady. She must have fainted." "Fainted?" Major Grayson scoffed, looming over the scene. "Looks like someone gave her a good scare, or worse." Poirot's eyes narrowed as he took in the scene. He knelt beside Emily, gently prying the torn paper from her hand. It was another note, the handwriting identical to the others. "The truth is closer than you think." The rest of the message was missing, the paper ripped cleanly across the middle. "Mon dear," Poirot murmured, his mind racing. He turned to Clara. "Mademoiselle, was Emily with you this evening?" Clara nodded, her eyes wide. "She was helping me unpack after dinner. She seemed fine, though, perhaps a little distracted." "Distracted," Poirot repeated, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp. He rose, slipping the torn note into his pocket alongside the others. "We must ensure Mademoiselle Emily is cared for. Dr. Ramsay, might you attend to her?" "Of course," Ramsay said, though his hands trembled as he helped lift Emily onto a nearby chaise. The other guests hovered, their faces a mix of concern and suspicion. Lady Beatrice took charge, her voice firm. "This is intolerable. First blackmail, now. This, Hercule, what is going on in my house?" Poirot raised a hand, his expression calm but authoritative. "Patience, madame. The truth, it is like a delicate flower, requires care to uncover, but it will bloom in time. For now, let us ensure Emily's safety and retire for the night. Tomorrow, I shall begin my inquiries in earnest." The guests dispersed reluctantly, their whispers following them like shadows. Poirot remained in the hallway, his eyes lingering on the spot where Emily had fallen. The torn note, the blackmail, the strained relationships among the guests all were pieces of a puzzle, and Hercule Poirot was determined to fit them together as he made his way to his room. The storm outside raged on, the wind howling like a chorus of restless spirits, but it was the storm within Ravenwood Manor that occupied Poirot's thoughts. Lies, he knew, were the currency of this game, and someone among them was spending freely. The question was not merely who, but why and how far they were willing to go to protect their secrets. The next morning, Ravenwood Manor was cloaked in a heavy silence, the snow piling high against the windows, sealing the inhabitants in a world of their own making. Poirot rose early, his mind already turning over the events of the previous night. He dressed with his usual precision, suit, polished shoes, and a perfectly knotted tie for making his way to the breakfast room. The table was sparsely attended. Lady Beatrice sat at its head, her face pale but composed. Edward was absent, as was Clara, though Sylvia Marlowe was present, sipping coffee with an air of studied nonchalance. Dr. Ramsay entered shortly after Poirot, his eyes bloodshot, as though he had not slept. "Good morning, Monsieur Poirot," Lady Beatrice said, her voice tight. "I trust you slept well, despite everything." "Calm, C.I. Calm, Car," Poirot replied, taking a seat. "The mind, it does not rest when there is a mystery to unravel. Tell me, madame, how is Mademoiselle Emily this morning?" "She's awake," Dr. Ramsay interjected, his voice low. "Resting in her room. She claims she doesn't remember what happened last night. Says she felt dizzy and then nothing." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Amnesia, you say? Most convenient. And the torn note, has she offered any explanation?" Ramsay shook his head. "She says she doesn't know how it got into her hand. I'm inclined to believe her. She's a simple girl, not one for schemes." "Simple girls," Poirot said, his tone mild, "are often the most surprising. I should like to speak with her myself, if I may." "Of course," Lady Beatrice said, though her eyes betrayed her unease. "But surely, Hercule, you don't suspect Emily of anything sinister? She's been with Clara for years, utterly devoted." "Devotion," Poirot said, stirring his coffee with a delicate hand, "can be a powerful motive, madame, as can fear, or love, or greed. I suspect everyone until the little grey cells tell me otherwise." Sylvia let out a soft laugh, drawing Poirot's attention. "You're quite the philosopher, Monsieur Poirot. Tell me, do you always see the world as a stage for deception?" "Not always, Mademoiselle Marlowe," Poirot replied, his eyes gleaming. "But in a house such as this, where secrets are as thick as the snow outside, one must be vigilant. Tell me, what were you doing last night after dinner?" Sylvia's smile didn't waver, but her fingers tightened around her coffee cup. "I was in my room, preparing for bed. A dull evening, I'm afraid. No intrigue to report." "And yet," Poirot said, leaning forward slightly, "you seem to take great interest in the intrigues of others. Mademoiselle Wentworth's announcement last night amused you, Nan?" Sylvia's eyes narrowed, but her tone remained light. "Clara's a dramatic sort. I suppose it comes with being an heiress. All that money, all those secrets, it's practically a script." Poirot nodded, filing away her words. Sylvia's flippancy was a mask, he was certain, but for what? Jealousy, knowledge, or something more dangerous? The breakfast was interrupted by the arrival of Edward, his face haggard, his tie slightly askew. "Mother, have you seen Clara? She wasn't in her room this morning." Lady Beatrice frowned. "Not since last night. Perhaps she's with Emily." "I checked," Edward said, his voice tight. "Emily's alone. Clara's gone." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Gone, you say? In this storm, impossible. The manor is sealed tighter than a drum. No, Monsieur Edward, your fiancée is here, somewhere, and we shall find her." He rose, his movements brisk. "Come, Mies Amos. We must search the manor at once. And while we do, I shall begin to construct my mind map, a tool, you understand, to make order from chaos." The search began in earnest, the guests splitting up to cover the sprawling manor. Poirot took the opportunity to observe their interactions, noting the way Edward's eyes lingered on Sylvia, the way Dr. Ramsay avoided Major Grayson's glare, the way Lady Beatrice's hands trembled as she called for Clara. The manor was a labyrinth of secrets, and Poirot was determined to navigate it. They found Clara in the conservatory, sitting alone among the wilted plants, her face pale but composed. She held a small photograph in her hands, its edges worn as though it had been handled often. "Clara," Edward exclaimed, rushing to her side. "Where have you been? We were worried sick." "I needed air," Clara said, her voice distant. "This house, it suffocates me." Poirot approached, his eyes on the photograph. "Mademoiselle, may I see what you hold?" Clara hesitated, then handed it over. It was an old image, faded but clear. A young Clara, no more than 20, standing beside a man Poirot did not recognize. The man's face was stern, his arm around Clara's shoulders in a possessive manner. "Who is this, mademoiselle?" Poirot asked, his tone gentle but insistent. Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away. "Someone from my past. Someone I'd rather forget." Poirot nodded, slipping the photograph into his pocket alongside the notes. "We shall speak more of this later, mademoiselle. For now, return to the others. The storm, it is not only outside, I fear." As Clara and Edward left the conservatory, Poirot lingered, his eyes scanning the room. A glint of metal caught his attention, a small key half hidden beneath a potted fern. He picked it up, turning it over in his hand. It was ornate, likely for a safe or a locked drawer. "Double quotes, Curieux," he murmured. "The pieces, they begin to fall into place." The rest of the day passed in a haze of tension. Poirot interviewed each guest in turn, his questions, sharp but polite, designed to probe without alarming. Edward admitted to a past business deal with Major Grayson that had gone sour, though he insisted it was resolved. Sylvia spoke vaguely of her time in London, hinting at a scandal that had driven her to the stage. Dr. Ramsay confessed to a nervous disposition, blaming the stress of his medical practice. Lady Beatrice, meanwhile, maintained a stoic front, though Poirot sensed her fear for her son's future by evening. Poirot retreated to his room, spreading out the notes and the photograph. On his desk, he began to sketch his mind map, a web of names and connections, motives and alibis. At its center was Clara, her secrets radiating outward like cracks in a mirror. The blackmail note, the torn letter, the photograph, the cue were threads. But the pattern was not yet clear. As night fell, the storm showed no sign of abating. Poirot stood at his window, watching the snow swirl in the darkness. Somewhere in this manner, a liar was weaving a deadly web, and he was determined to cut through it. But as he turned back to his mind map, a chilling thought struck him. What if the liar was not alone? What if this game of lies was a conspiracy with more than one player? He shook his head, dismissing the thought for now. "One step at a time, Hercule," he murmured. "The little grey cells, they will not fail me." But as he blew out his candle and prepared for bed, the echo of that scream lingered in his mind, a warning that the game was far from over. Chapter 4. The mind map begins. Hercule Poirot sat in the dimly lit study of Ravenwood Manor, his small, meticulous hands arranging a series of index cards on the polished mahogany desk. The fire in the hearth crackled softly, casting flickering shadows across the room, but Poirot's focus was unwavering. His little grey cells, as he so often called them, were already at work, weaving together the threads of the mystery that had begun to unfold in this isolated estate. The snowstorm outside raged on, sealing the manor's inhabitants within its walls, and with it the secrets that simmered beneath their polished exteriors. The events of the previous night, Clara Wentworth's revelation of blackmail, the attack on her maid Emily, and the cryptic note warning of lies that kill had set the stage for a puzzle that Poirot knew would require all his intellect to unravel. He adjusted his pince-nez glasses and surveyed the cards before him. Each one bore a name, a clue, or a question, meticulously written in his precise, elegant script. This was the beginning of his mind map, a method he had perfected over years of solving the most confounding cases. It was not merely a collection of facts, but a living, breathing construct that allowed him to see connections others missed. The blackmail note, Emily's mysterious collapse, and the strained interactions among the guests were all pieces of a larger mosaic, and Poirot was determined to fit them together. The study door creaked open, and Hastings, Poirot's loyal friend and confidant, entered, brushing snow from his coat despite having been indoors for hours. "Poirot, old chap, it's a regular blizzard out there. No one's going anywhere until this storm lets up. Have you made any sense of this mess yet?" Poirot's mustache twitched slightly, a sign of amusement at Hastings' impatience. "Mon ami, sense is not something one makes. It is something one uncovers. The truth, it lies beneath the surface, hidden by the lies of those who surround us. But fear not, Poirot has begun his work." He gestured to the cards on the desk. "This is the mind map, Hastings. It is the key to understanding the deceptions that swirl around Ravenwood Manor." Hastings peered over Poirot's shoulder, his brow furrowing at the array of cards. "Looks like a lot of scribbles to me. Care to explain what you're up to?" Poirot leaned back in his chair, his eyes gleaming with the quiet confidence of a man who thrived on complexity. Each card represents a piece of the puzzle and fate. An indus, un, question. The blackmail note, for instance. He plucked a card from the desk, labeled blackmail note, lies that kill. It was found in the drawing room, yes, but by whom? And why was it placed where all could see it? This is not the work of a careless criminal, Hastings. It is deliberate, meant to provoke fear, or perhaps to distract. Hastings nodded slowly, though his expression suggested he was still grappling with the concept. "And Emily's attack? You think it's connected?" Poirot's fingers tapped lightly on another card. This one marked Emily's collapse. "Maiswe, it is no coincidence. The maid, she is found unconscious in the corridor, clutching a torn letter. Yet, when she awakens, she claims to remember nothing. Amnesia, Hastings, is a convenient refuge for those who wish to hide the truth. I suspect Mademoiselle Emily knows more than she admits." He placed the card next to one labeled Clara Wentworth, blackmail victim, and drew a line connecting them with a pencil. "Clara, she tells us she is being blackmailed over a scandal in her past, yet she refuses to divulge its nature. Why? Is it shame, or is it strategy? And this torn letter, perhaps it was the blackmail demand itself, or perhaps it is something else entirely." Hastings rubbed his chin, trying to keep up. "So you think Emily was attacked because she saw something she shouldn't have, or because she's involved somehow?" Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Both are possible, mon ami. The attack on Emily was not random. It was meant to silence or to warn. But we must consider the others as well." He gestured to a cluster of cards bearing the names of the other guests: Edward Langley, Major Harold Grayson, Sylvia Marlowe, Dr. Victor Ramsay, and Lady Beatrice Langley. Each has their secrets, their motives. The Major, he argues with Edward over a business deal gone sour. Sylvia, she watches everyone with the eyes of a hawk, yet her smiles are too sharp. Dr. Ramsay, he is nervous, always looking over his shoulder. And Lady Beatrice, she invited Poirot here for a reason she knows more than she reveals. Hastings frowned. You think Lady Beatrice is hiding something? She seems genuinely worried about her son's engagement. Precisement, Poirot said, his voice low. But worry, it can be a mask. She speaks of a family secret, yet she does not share it. Why invite Hercule Poirot, if not to uncover what she herself cannot face? Nan, Hastings, everyone in this manor is playing a part, and I must determine who is the puppet and who pulls the strings. The door opened again, and a pale, trembling Emily entered, escorted by a servant. Her face was drawn, her eyes darting nervously as she sat in the chair Poirot indicated. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, you wanted to see me. Poirot's expression softened, but his eyes remained sharp. Oui, Mademoiselle Emily, I wish to understand what happened last night. You were found, unconscious, a torn letter in your hand. Can you tell me what you remember? Emily's hands twisted in her lap. I don't know, sir. It's all a blur. I was in the corridor, heading to Miss Clara's room to fetch her shawl. Then, nothing. I woke up in my bed, and the letter was gone. Poirot leaned forward, his gaze piercing. Nothing, you say. Yet your fingers, they clutched that letter as if it were a lifeline. Tell me, mademoiselle, have you received any strange messages recently? Perhaps a note, like the one found in the drawing room. Emily's eyes widened, and she shook her head quickly. No, sir, nothing like that. I swear it. Poirot studied her for a long moment, noting the slight tremor in her hands, the way her eyes avoided his. Very well, he said at last. But if your memory returns, you will come to Poirot, oui. The truth, it is the only way to safety. As Emily left, Hastings whispered, Do you believe her? Poirot shook his head. Her fear is genuine, but her words, Nan, they are not the whole truth. She is protecting someone or something. We must watch her closely. The investigation continued as Poirot and Hastings made their way to Clara's room, where the discovery of the hidden safe had added another layer to the mystery. The room was elegantly appointed, with heavy velvet curtains and a four-poster bed. But Poirot's attention was drawn to the small, ornate safe tucked behind a painting of a pastoral scene. It was open, its contents stiff. There had been any gone. Curious, Poirot murmured, examining the safe's lock. It is not forced, yet it is empty. Someone knew the combination, or it was left open deliberately. But why? To make us believe something was stolen, perhaps. Hastings scratched his head. Maybe Clara took whatever was in there herself. To keep it safe. Poirot's moustache twitched again. Or to make it appear that she is the victim. We must not assume, Hastings. Assumptions, they are the enemy of truth. He added a new card to his mind map. Empty safe in Clara's room. Beside it, he wrote a question. What was taken, and by whom? He connected it to Clara's card and Emily's, forming a triangle of suspicion. The safe, the blackmail, the attack on Emily, they are linked, I am certain. But the motive, it remains elusive. As the day wore on, Poirot interviewed each of the guests, piecing together their alibis and observing their behavior. Edward Langley, the charming heir, was polite but evasive when questioned about his argument with Major Grayson. It was nothing, Monsieur Poirot, he said, his smile a touch practiced. Just a disagreement over a failed investment. Grayson was bitter, but it's all in the past. Sylvia Marlowe, the actress, was more forthcoming, her sharp tongue cutting through pleasantries. Oh, I saw the way Grayson glared at Edward, she said, lounging on a chaise with a cigarette in hand. There's bad blood there, mark my words, and Clara. She's not as innocent as she seems. Those big eyes hide a calculating mind. Dr. Victor Ramsay, the family friend, was the most nervous of all, his hands trembling as he adjusted his glasses. I don't know anything about a blackmail note, he insisted. I'm just here to support Lady Beatrice. This is all terribly upsetting. Lady Beatrice herself remained composed, but Poirot noted the tightness around her mouth. When he mentioned the family secret, I only want what's best for Edward, she said. This engagement to Clara, it's a chance for stability. But I fear there are those who wish to tear us apart. By evening, Poirot's mind map had grown, a web of interconnected cards covering the desk. Names, clues, and questions were linked by lines and arrows, forming a pattern that was beginning to take shape. The blackmail note pointed to Clara, but also to Emily, who might have seen or heard something incriminating. The empty safe suggested a theft or a deception. The argument between Edward and Grayson hinted at a financial motive, while Sylvia's sharp observations suggested she knew more than she let on, and Dr. Ramsay's nervousness could indicate guilt, fear, or both. Poirot stood back, studying the map with a critical eye. It is not yet complete, he said to Hastings, who was nursing a brandy by the fire, but it begins to speak. The lies, they are like threads in a tapestry. Pull one, and the entire picture may unravel. Hastings sighed. I don't know how you do it, Poirot. All these bits and pieces, it's enough to drive a man mad. Poirot smiled faintly. Patience, mon ami. The mind map, it is not just a tool, it is a reflection of the human heart. Each lie, each secret, it leaves a trace. And Poirot, he will find them all. As night fell, the storm outside showed no signs of abating, and the atmosphere in Ravenwood Manor grew heavier. The guests retired to their rooms, but Poirot remained in the study, his mind racing. He added one final card to the map, labeled the blackmailer's motive. Beneath it, he wrote a single word: control. The stage was set, and the game of lies was only beginning. Poirot knew that. Chapter 5. A murder in the night. The clock in Ravenwood Manor's grand hall struck midnight, its chimes echoing through the corridors like a solemn warning. The snowstorm outside had intensified, blanketing the estate in a shroud of white that muffled all sound beyond the creaking walls. Hercule Poirot sat in his room, his notebook open, his pen poised above the intricate mind map he had begun sketching after dinner. The cryptic note warning of lies that kill. The unconscious made Emily clutching a torn letter, and the undercurrents of tension among the guests all swirled in his mind. His little grey cells, as he often called them, were hard at work, piecing together the fragments of deceit that permeated the manor. The evening had been fraught with unease. Clara Wentworth's revelation at dinner that she was being blackmailed over a past scandal had set the guests on edge. Her refusal to elaborate only deepened the mystery, and Poirot had observed the subtle glances exchanged across the table. Edward Langley's clenched jaw, Major Harold Grayson's barely concealed contempt, Sylvia Marlowe's sly smirk, and Dr. Victor Ramsay's nervous fidgeting. Each guest, it seemed, carried a secret, and Poirot was determined to uncover the truth before the storm trapped them all in a web of lies. He was about to retire for the night, when a piercing scream shattered the silence. It came from the direction of the library, a cavernous room lined with oak shelves and heavy velvet curtains. Poirot sprang to his feet, his instincts sharpened by years of unraveling mysteries. He grabbed his overcoat, slipped on his polished shoes, and hurried down the corridor, his cane tapping rhythmically against the polished floor. The library door was ajar when he arrived, the flickering light of a single candelabrum casting long shadows across the room. Major Harold Grayson lay slumped in a leather armchair, his face contorted in a grimace of agony. His brandy glass had fallen to the floor, its contents pooling on the Persian rug. The acrid scent of almonds hung in the air, unmistakable to Poirot's trained senses. Cyanide, mon Dieu, Poirot murmured, his eyes scanning the scene. He stepped carefully around the body, noting the details with precision. The glass was pristine, wiped clean of fingerprints, a sign of premeditation. Grayson's military medals gleamed on his chest, a stark contrast to the pallor of his skin. The fire in the hearth had burned low, and a single window was slightly open, letting in a draught that stirred the curtains. Footsteps pounded in the hall, and the other guests poured into the room, their faces a mixture of shock and suspicion. Lady Beatrice Langley, her silk robe hastily tied, gasped and clutched her pearls. Edward Langley stood frozen, his eyes fixed on Grayson's body. Clara Wentworth, pale but composed, hovered near the doorway, while Sylvia Marlowe let out a theatrical sob, her hand pressed to her chest. Dr. Victor Ramsay, his medical bag in hand, pushed forward, his expression grim. "Is he?" Beatrice began, her voice trembling. "Dead," Poirot confirmed, his tone calm but authoritative. "Poisoned, I believe, with cyanide. Dr. Ramsay, if you would be so kind as to confirm." Ramsay knelt beside the body, his hands steady despite his earlier nervousness. He checked Grayson's pulse, examined his eyes, and sniffed the air near the glass. "Cyanide, without a doubt," he said, his voice low. Death would have been swift within minutes. The room erupted in murmurs. Edward stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "This is outrageous. Who would do this?" Grayson was a difficult man, but murder, difficult, you say? Poirot's eyes gleamed as he turned to Edward. "Perhaps you could elaborate, Monsieur Langley. I observed a certain tension between you and the Major at dinner. A disagreement, Nan." Edward's jaw tightened. It was nothing, a business deal gone sour years ago. He held a grudge, but I didn't kill him. "Calm yourself, Edward," Beatrice said sharply, though her hands trembled. "No one is accusing you." "Not yet," Sylvia muttered, her voice dripping with venom. She caught Poirot's gaze and quickly looked away, her fingers twisting. A silk scarf. Poirot raised a hand for silence. "Madame Ety, messieurs, a crime has been committed, and we are all, for the moment, confined by the storm. I urge you to remain calm and return to your rooms. I will examine the scene and speak with each of you in turn. The truth, it will reveal itself, but only if we proceed with order." Reluctantly, the guests dispersed, casting wary glances at one another. Poirot remained in the library, his mind racing. The wiped glass suggested a careful killer, someone who knew the manner well enough to act swiftly and silently. The cyanide, a poison not easily obtained, pointed to someone with access to chemicals, perhaps Dr. Ramsay, whose medical expertise made him an immediate suspect. Yet Poirot's instincts warned against hasty conclusions. The little grey cells, he murmured to himself, they must work harder. He began a meticulous search of the library. The room was a treasure trove of potential clues, shelves lined with dusty tomes, a writing desk cluttered with papers, and a sideboard where the brandy decanter sat, its amber liquid glinting in the candlelight. Poirot examined the decanter, noting that it was nearly full, suggesting the poison had been added to Grayson's glass alone. He inspected the window, finding no signs of forced entry, only the faint trace of snow on the sill where the draught had blown in. His attention turned to the desk, where a few scattered papers caught his eye. Among them was a half-finished letter in Grayson's bold handwriting, addressed to Edward. "You will not get away with it." I know the truth about the sentence ended abruptly, the pen lying askew as if Grayson had been interrupted. Slipped the letter into his pocket, his mind racing with possibilities. What truth had Grayson known, and why had it cost him his life? The next hour was spent questioning the servants who had gathered in the kitchen, their faces pale with fear. The butler, Mr. Collins, confirmed that the brandy decanter had been untouched since dinner, and no one had entered the library until the scream. The housemaid, Jane, tearfully admitted to overhearing Grayson and Edward arguing earlier that day, though she couldn't make out the details. Poirot noted her nervousness, but sensed she was telling the truth. Returning to his room, Poirot added to his mind map, sketching lines between Grayson's death, the blackmail note, and Emily's attack. The connections were murky, but one thing was clear: the killer was among them, and the motive was tied to secrets buried within Ravenwood Manor. He recalled Clara's guarded demeanor at dinner, her refusal to name her blackmailer. Could she have silenced Grayson to protect her secret? Or was Edward, desperate to secure his engagement and inheritance, driven to murder? The next morning, the storm showed no signs of abating, and the manor felt like a prison. Poirot gathered the guests in the drawing-room, his expression grave. "Major Grayson's death was no accident," he began, his voice cutting through the tense silence. "The cyanide was placed in his glass, and the glass was wiped clean. This was a calculated act, and I will uncover the truth. I ask each of you to account for your movements last night." Edward spoke first, his voice steady but strained. "I was in my room after dinner, writing letters. I didn't leave until I heard the scream." Clara nodded. "I was with Emily, checking on her after." "What happened?" "I didn't go near the library." Sylvia tossed her hair, her tone defiant. "I was in my room, practicing lines for my next play. Alone, of course." Dr. Ramsay cleared his throat. "I was in the conservatory, reviewing some medical notes. I heard the scream and came running." Beatrice, her face drawn, said simply, "I retired early. This has been a trying weekend." Poirot's eyes narrowed, and yet someone entered the library, poisoned the Major, and left no trace. "I find it curious that no one saw anything, Nan." He paced the room, his cane tapping softly. "The killer is clever, but no one is infallible. There is always a clue, a thread to pull." The guests exchanged uneasy glances, and Poirot noted the subtle shifts in their postures. Clara's clasped hands, Edward's clenched fists, Sylvia's forced nonchalance. Dr. Ramsay's eyes darted to the door, as if longing to escape. Poirot decided to press further, starting with Edward. "Monsieur Langley, you mentioned a business deal with Major Grayson. What was its nature, and why did it provoke such anger?" Edward hesitated, his eyes flickering to his mother. "It was a land investment years ago. Grayson claimed I cheated him out of his share, but he was mistaken. He never let it go. And this truth he wrote about in his letter." Poirot asked, producing the unfinished note from his pocket. Edward paled. "I don't know what he meant. He was always making accusations." Poirot turned to Clara. Mademoiselle Wentworth, you spoke of blackmail. Did Major Grayson know of this scandal you fear? Clara's lips tightened. I don't know. I told you. I don't know who's behind it. And yet Poirot said softly, someone in this house knows. Someone who uses lies to manipulate and destroy. The interrogation continued, but no one confessed, and the alibis held for now. Poirot dismissed the guests, his mind buzzing with contradictions. Grayson's death was a pivot point, a bold move by a killer confident in their ability to outwit him. But Poirot was not so easily defeated. He returned to the library, determined to find the missing piece. Hours later, as he sifted through Grayson's belongings, he found a small key tucked inside a cigarette case. It was ornate, unlike the standard keys used in the manor. Poirot's pulse quickened. A key meant a lock, and a lock meant something hidden. He began searching the library anew, running his fingers along the bookshelves, tapping for hollow panels. Near the fireplace, a faint click rewarded his efforts, and a small compartment opened, revealing a leather-bound journal. Grayson's journal was a goldmine of information. It detailed his suspicions about Edward's business dealings, hinting at fraud that could ruin the Langley family. But more intriguing was a passage about Clara. She's not what she seems. The Wentworth fortune is a lie, and I have proof. The proof, however, was missing, likely stolen from the safe in Clara's room. Poirot's mind map grew more complex, lines branching from Grayson to Clara, Edward, and the mysterious safe. The journal confirmed Grayson was a threat to multiple parties, but who had acted first? And why wipe the glass but leave the journal? Was the killer careless, or was this another layer of deception? As night fell, Poirot sat by the fire, his notebook open. The storm raged outside, but inside, a different storm was brewing. Grayson's murder was only the beginning, and Poirot knew the killer would strike again unless he unraveled the web of lies. He closed his eyes, letting his little grey cells work. Certain that the truth was within his grasp, only he could find the final thread. The next day brought no relief from the snow, and the manor's atmosphere grew heavier. Poirot resumed his questioning, focusing on Dr. Ramsay. The doctor's medical bag, he learned, contained a small quantity of cyanide, ostensibly for research. Ramsay's explanation was plausible, but his nervous demeanor betrayed fear. Swear I didn't use it, he insisted, sweat beading on his brow. Then who did, Doctor? Poirot asked, his voice soft but piercing. You have access to the poison, and you were in the conservatory near the library when the murder occurred. Ramsay stammered, I don't know. I'm not a killer. Poirot let him go, noting the doctor's panic. He then turned his attention to Sylvia, whose sharp tongue and quick wit made her a formidable suspect. Mademoiselle Marlowe, you seem remarkably composed for one so close to a murder. Sylvia laughed, a brittle sound. I'm an actress, Monsieur Poirot. I know how to keep my nerve. And yet, Poirot said, your scarf was found near the library door. Care to explain? Sylvia's smile faltered. I must have dropped it earlier. I was in the hall, but I didn't go inside. Poirot nodded, unconvinced. The scarf, like the wiped glass, was a deliberate clue, placed to mislead or to point to the truth. He added it to his mind map, connecting it to Sylvia's vague alibi and her barbed comments about Clara. As the day wore on, Poirot's investigation deepened. He interviewed Emily again, hoping to jog her memory about the torn letter. She remained evasive, claiming the attack had left her disoriented. But her eyes, wide and fearful, told a different story. Poirot suspected she was protecting someone, perhaps Clara, her mistress, or another guest with whom she shared a secret. By evening, the manor was a powder keg of suspicion. The guests avoided one another, their conversations clipped and guarded. Poirot, however, was undeterred. He spent hours in the library reconstructing the timeline of Grayson's death. The poison had been administered between 11 o'clock and 11:30 p.m., based on Ramsay's estimates. The library's isolation meant the killer had acted alone, slipping in and out unnoticed. But how had they obtained the cyanide, and why target Grayson? Poirot's thoughts returned to the journal. Grayson's knowledge of Clara's false fortune suggested a financial motive, but Edward's business dealings hinted at a deeper scandal. The key from the cigarette case nagged at him. He resolved to search Clara's room again, suspecting the safe held answers. Under the guise of checking on Emily, Poirot gained access to Clara's quarters. The safe, hidden behind a painting, was empty, but the lock matched the key from Grayson's case. Whatever had been inside, documents, perhaps, or proof of Clara's scandal, had been taken. Poirot found a single clue, a faint smudge of red wax on the safe's interior, suggesting a sealed envelope had been stored there. The wax was a breakthrough. Poirot recalled seeing a similar red seal on a letter in Beatrice's study, used for family correspondence. Had the stolen documents belonged to the Langleys? And if so, why had Clara possessed them? As Poirot left Clara's room, he encountered Edward in the hall, his face pale. "Monsieur Poirot, I must speak with you. I think I know who killed Grayson." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Indeed? Then let us talk, Monsieur Langley. The truth, it waits for no one." Edward led him to a quiet parlour, his voice low. "It's Clara. She's been acting strange, secretive. Grayson was threatening to expose her, and I think she snapped." Poirot studied Edward's face, searching for signs of deceit. "And why, monsieur, would you accuse your fiancée? Is there not a risk to your own position?" Edward's eyes flashed. "I love her, but I won't protect a murderer. Grayson knew something about her past, something she wouldn't tell me. I found her burning papers in her room last night, after the murder." Poirot's pulse quickened. Burning papers suggested guilt, but Edward's eagerness to point the finger was suspicious. Was he deflecting attention from himself, or was Clara truly the mastermind? The investigation continued, with Poirot piecing together fragments of truth. He confronted Clara about the burned papers, and she admitted to destroying old letters, claiming they were personal and unrelated to Grayson. Her composure, however, was cracking, and Poirot sensed she was hiding more than she admitted. By the third day, the storm had not relented, and the manor's isolation heightened the tension. Poirot's mind map now spanned several pages, with lines connecting Grayson's journal, the cyanide, the red wax, and the torn letter. He was close, he knew, to unraveling the killer's identity. But one piece was missing, motive that tied all the clues together. That night, as Poirot sat in his room, a soft knock interrupted his thoughts. It was Jane, the housemaid, her face pale. "Monsieur Poirot, I heard something last night, after the murder. Footsteps, near the library. I didn't tell you before, because I was scared." Poirot leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "And whose footsteps, Mademoiselle Jane?" She hesitated, then whispered, "I think it was Dr. Ramsay. He was carrying something, a small bottle. I saw him slip into the conservatory. Poirot thanked her and dismissed her, his mind racing. Ramsay's access to cyanide, his proximity to the library, and now this testimony painted a damning picture. Yet Poirot's instincts warned him of a larger game at play. The killer was not acting alone, he suspected, but manipulating others to conceal their tracks. The next morning, Poirot gathered the guests once more, his demeanor calm but resolute. "Mies Amos, we are close to the truth. Major Grayson's death was a calculated act designed to protect a secret. The cyanide, the wiped glass, the journal all point to a killer among us. I ask you once more, if you know anything, speak now." Silence greeted him, but the air was thick with fear. Poirot's eyes lingered on Clara, whose hands trembled slightly, and on Ramsay, whose face was ashen. The mind map in his pocket felt heavy, a testament to the lies he was unraveling. As the day drew to a close, Poirot stood by the library window, watching the snow fall. The storm would not last forever, but the killer's time was running out. He would find the truth, he vowed, no matter how deeply it was buried. The little grey cells had never failed him, and they would not fail now. Chapter 6. Secrets of the Manor. The snow fell relentlessly outside Ravenwood Manor, blanketing the estate in a silence that seemed to amplify the tension within its walls. Hercule Poirot stood in the dimly lit hallway, his gloved hands clasped. Behind his back, his moustache impeccably groomed, despite the late hour. The discovery of Major Harold Grayson's body in the library had cast a pall over the gathering, and the air was thick with suspicion. Each guest, Poirot noted, wore a mask of composure, but their eyes betrayed the fear and secrets they carried. The little grey cells, as he liked to call them, were already at work, piecing together the fragments of this deadly puzzle. Poirot's first task was to search the manor thoroughly. The grand old house, with its creaking floors and shadowed corridors, held more than its share of mysteries. He began in the library, where Grayson's body had been found, the scent of brandy and cyanide still lingering faintly. The room was a study in opulence. Mahogany shelves lined with leather-bound volumes, a crystal chandelier casting fractured light, and a massive fireplace that roared with a fire that did little to warm the chill of death. Poirot's sharp eyes scanned the scene, noting the wiped clean glass on the table, the untouched books, and the faint scuff marks on the polished floor near the window. Someone had been here, he thought, someone careful enough to cover their tracks, but not careful enough to escape Hercule Poirot. He moved to the window, its heavy velvet curtains drawn against the storm. A faint draught brushed his cheek, and he parted the curtains to reveal a latch that was slightly ajar. The window, though locked now, could have been opened briefly perhaps, to dispose of evidence or to signal someone outside. Poirot filed this observation away, his mind already constructing a map of possibilities. The killer, he reasoned, was not only cunning but familiar with the manor's layout. This was no impulsive act. It was a calculated strike. Leaving the library, Poirot ascended the grand staircase, his polished shoes silent on the thick carpet. He made his way to Clara Wentworth's room, where the empty safe had been discovered the previous evening. The room was elegantly appointed, with a four-poster bed draped in silk, a vanity cluttered with perfumes, and a wardrobe filled with gowns that spoke of wealth and ambition. The safe, hidden behind a portrait of a stern-faced Langley ancestor, was indeed empty, its door slightly ajar. Poirot examined it closely, noting the absence of fingerprints or scratches. Whoever had opened it knew the combination or had access to a key. Clara's insistence that nothing valuable was kept inside struck him as odd. We have a safe at all, then. As he searched the room, Poirot's attention was drawn to a small writing desk in the corner. Among the papers, letters, receipts, and a few invitations was a photograph tucked inside a drawer. It showed Clara, younger and less guarded, standing beside a man Poirot did not recognize. The man's face was partially obscured by a shadow, but his posture suggested familiarity, perhaps intimacy. The photograph was creased, as if it had been handled often, and on the back was a faint inscription: London, 1923. Poirot's brow furrowed. Clara had mentioned fleeing London after a mysterious incident. Could this man be connected to her past? He slipped the photograph into his pocket, intending to confront her later. Next, Poirot sought out Sylvia Marlowe, the sharp-tongued actress whose presence at Ravenwood seemed to unsettle everyone. Her room was a contrast to Clara's, cluttered with theatrical props, scripts, and a mirror framed with photographs of her performances. Sylvia was lounging on a chaise, a cigarette in hand, her eyes narrowing as Poirot entered. "Monsieur." "Poirot," she drawled, "come to accuse me of murder already." "Not yet, mademoiselle," Poirot replied, his tone polite but firm. "But I am curious about your connections here. You seem to know more about the Langleys than you let on." Sylvia exhaled a plume of smoke, her lips curling into a wry smile. "You're sharp, aren't you? Fine, I'll give you something. Edward and we had a moment, years ago. A fling, nothing more. He was charming, I was bored, and Ravenwood was a convenient stage. But don't think I'm pining for him. I'm not the type to cling to old flames." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And yet, you are here, at his engagement announcement." "Why, mademoiselle?" Sylvia's smile faltered. "Beatrice invited me. Said it would be amusing to have me here. I think she wanted to stir the pot, remind Edward of his past mistakes. She's not as proper as she seems, you know." This revelation added a new thread to Poirot's mental tapestry. Beatrice Langley, the matriarch, had her own motives, it seemed. Was she manipulating the guests to expose Edward's flaws, or was there a deeper game at play? Poirot thanked Sylvia and left, his mind racing. His next stop was Dr. Victor Ramsay's room, where the nervous physician was packing his medical bag with a trembling hand. Poirot's arrival startled him, and a vial slipped from his grasp, rolling across the floor. Poirot retrieved it, noting the label, cyanide. "For research, monsieur?" Poirot asked, his voice deceptively mild. Ramsay's face paled. "Yes. Yes, of course. It's for chemical analysis, you see. I study toxins, their effects on the body. Perfectly legitimate. Curious," Poirot mused, "that such a substance should be found in your possession after Major Grayson's death. By cyanide, you understand, monsieur, how this might appear." Ramsay stammered. I had nothing to do with it. I keep it locked away, always. Someone must have taken it." "I'm being framed, Poirot." Poirot's expression remained impassive, but he noted Ramsay's panic. A guilty man might protest too much, but so might an innocent one caught in a web, not of his making. He left Ramsay to his agitation and continued his search. Determined to uncover more, the manor's upper floors held a warren of unused rooms, and Poirot's instincts led him to a dusty corridor sealed by a heavy oak door. It was locked, but a quick application of a hairpin acquired from Sylvia's room earlier proved sufficient. Inside was a hidden room, its walls lined with shelves of old documents and faded photographs. A table in the center held a stack of letters, yellowed with age, and another photograph, this one showing a younger Beatrice Langley with a man who bore a striking resemblance to the one in Clara's picture. The letters were addressed to my dearest Edmund, Beatrice's late husband, and hinted at a scandal involving an illegitimate child. One letter, dated 1905, mentioned a woman named Eliza, who had left Ravenwood under mysterious circumstances. Poirot's pulse quickened. This was no mere family secret. It was a potential motive for murder. If Clara was connected to this child, was the child herself who'd explained the blackmail, the empty safe, and even Grayson's death. He gathered the letters and photograph, adding them to his growing collection of clues. Returning to the drawing room, Poirot updated his mind map, a mental exercise he visualized as a web of interconnected threads. Each guest was a node, linked by motives, secrets, and lies. Clara's photograph tied her to an unknown man, possibly the illegitimate heir. Sylvia's affair with Edward suggested jealousy or revenge. Ramsay's cyanide vial pointed to opportunity, if not intent. And Beatrice's invitation to Sylvia hinted at a calculated move to destabilize her son's engagement. Grayson's death, Poirot suspected, was the first move in a larger game, one where the stakes were nothing less than control of Ravenwood Manor. As the day wore on, Poirot observed the guests closely. Edward Langley, pale and shaken, avoided Clara's gaze, his charm replaced by a haunted look. Clara, meanwhile, maintained her composure, but her hands trembled slightly as she poured tea. Beatrice presided over the gathering with icy calm, her eyes flicking to Poirot as if gauging his progress. The servants, too, were uneasy, whispering among themselves about the cursed manor. Poirot approached Emily, the maid who had been attacked, now recovered but still pale. She sat in a corner, her eyes darting nervously. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said gently, "you claimed amnesia, but I believe you know more than you say. The letter you clutched, what did it contain?" Emily's lips quivered. I don't remember, sir. It was all a blur." Poirot leaned closer, his voice low. "The truth, mademoiselle, is your only protection now. Someone wished you harm. Help me find them." Tears welled in Emily's eyes, but she shook her head. "I can't. They'll hurt me again." Poirot did not press further, but her fear confirmed his suspicion. Emily was a pawn in someone's game, possibly the blackmailers. He added her reaction to his mind map, linking it to the torn letter and the empty safe. That evening, as the snow continued to fall, Poirot gathered the guests for dinner, his presence a quiet reminder of his authority. The conversation was strained, punctuated by awkward silences. Edward attempted to lighten the mood with a toast to Clara, but it fell flat when Major Grayson's empty chair loomed at the table's end. Sylvia, emboldened by wine, made a barbed comment about Edward's wandering heart. Earning a sharp look from Beatrice, Poirot seized the moment. "Mies Amos," he said, standing, "a murder has been committed in this house, and the killer is among us. But do not fear, Hercule Poirot sees all. The lies you tell, the secrets you hide, they are like threads in a tapestry. I am unraveling them, one by one." His words hung in the air, and he noted each reaction. Clara's clenched jaw, Edward's flushed cheeks, Ramsay's fidgeting hands, Sylvia's defiant smirk, and Beatrice's unreadable stare. The killer, he knew, was watching him, calculating. Their next move, as the night deepened, Poirot retired to his room, but sleep eluded him. He sat at a small desk, sketching his mind map on paper now, lines crisscrossing between names and clues. The photograph, the letters, the cyanide, the empty safe all pointed to a truth buried in Ravenwood's past. But one question gnawed at him. Why now? What had triggered this deadly chain of events? A soft knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. It was Beatrice, her face pale in the candlelight. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice low, "I must speak with you. There is something you need to know about Clara." Poirot gestured for her to sit, his eyes never leaving her face. "Speak." "Madame, the truth is our only weapon now." Beatrice hesitated, then began. "Clara is not what she seems. I invited her here to test her, to see if she could be trusted with Edward's future. But I've heard rumors about her past, her reasons for coming to Ravenwood. I fear she may be after more than my son's heart, such as—" "Poirot," prompted. Beatrice's voice dropped to a whisper. "The manor, its legacy. There are documents hidden away that could change everything. I thought they were safe, but now I'm not sure." Poirot's mind raced. The hidden room, the letters, the photograph fit all aligned with Beatrice's fears. But was she telling the whole truth, or was this another layer of deception? He thanked her and promised to investigate further, his mind already weaving her words into his map. The next morning, Poirot returned to the hidden room, determined to find more. Among the documents, he discovered a ledger detailing payments to an E.W., possibly Eliza Wentworth, Clara's mother or relative. The payments stopped abruptly in 1905, the same year as the letter mentioning the illegitimate child. This was no coincidence, Poirot thought. The manor's ownership, the blackmail, the murders all were tied to this secret heir. He confronted Clara later that day, showing her the photograph. "Mademoiselle, this man, who is he? And why does he appear in a photograph with you and in letters hidden in this house?" Clara's face drained of color. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice wavered. "Do not lie to Hercule Poirot," he said sharply. "Your past, your secrets, they are unraveling. Tell me the truth, or the consequences will be severe." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she shook her head. "I can't, not yet. You don't understand what's at stake." Poirot let her go, but her refusal only deepened his resolve. The killer was close. He could feel it, their lies tightening like a noose. He updated his mind map, adding Clara's reaction, Beatrice's warning, and the ledger's implications. The web was growing, but one thread remained elusive, the identity of the mastermind pulling the strings as the snowstorm raged on, trapping them all in Ravenwood's gilded cage. Poirot knew time was running out. The killer would strike again unless he could unravel the secrets of the manor first. With his little grey cells working tirelessly, he prepared for the next phase of his investigation. Certain that the truth was within reach if only he could see it clearly. Chapter 7. The blackmailer's shadow. The snow continued to fall outside Ravenwood Manor, blanketing the estate in a suffocating silence that mirrored the tension within its walls. The discovery of Major Grayson's body in the library had cast a pall over the guests, each now eyeing the others with suspicion. Hercule Poirot, however, remained unruffled, his keen eyes darting from face to face as he stood in the drawing room, his hands clasped behind his back. The air was thick with unspoken accusations, and the little Belgian detective knew that the key to unraveling the murder lay in the web of secrets that bound the guests together. The morning after Grayson's death, the manor felt colder, not just from the storm, but from the chilling realization that a killer walked among them. Poirot had risen early, his mind already at work, piecing together the fragments of the puzzle. The second blackmail note, found slipped under the door of the drawing room just before breakfast, had sent a fresh wave of unease through the household. It was written in the same sharp, angular script as the first, its words cutting like a blade. The truth is buried beneath your lies, Clara. Pay the price, or it will be exposed. Clara Wentworth, the intended recipient, had paled upon reading it, her delicate hands trembling as she clutched the paper. The other guests, gathered for breakfast, had watched her reaction with varying degrees of curiosity and suspicion. Edward Langley, her fiancé, had tried to comfort her, but his touch seemed to stiffen her further. Lady Beatrice, seated at the head of the table, had pursed her lips, her eyes narrowing as she observed her future daughter-in-law. Dr. Victor Ramsay, ever the nervous figure, had dropped his fork with a clatter, while Sylvia Marlowe, the actress, had arched an eyebrow, her lips curling into a faint, knowing smile. Poirot, standing near the fireplace, had taken it all in. The note, he deduced, was not merely a threat but a catalyst, designed to provoke a reaction that would reveal more than words alone could. He had requested the note be handed to him, and now it rested in his pocket. Its weight, a reminder of the unseen hand pulling the strings of this deadly game. Mise, Amos. Poirot began, his voice cutting through the murmurs around the breakfast table. This note confirms what I have suspected. There is a blackmailer among us, one who weaves lies to manipulate and control. But I, Hercule Poirot, will not be swayed by such games. The truth, it always reveals itself to those who observe with care. Clara's eyes darted to him, her composure faltering. I don't know what they want from me, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I've done nothing wrong. Nothing. Wrong, Sylvia interjected, her tone sharp. Then why do you look like a cornered doe every time one of these notes appears? What are you hiding, Clara? Sylvia, that's enough, Edward snapped, his hands slamming on the table. Clara's been through enough without your accusations. Accusations. Sylvia laughed, a brittle sound. I'm only saying what everyone's thinking. Someone here is playing a dangerous game, and I'd wager Clara knows more than she's letting on. Poirot raised a hand, silencing the brewing argument. Mademoiselle Marlowe, your observations are noted, but it is not for us to accuse without evidence. The little grey cells, they require facts, not speculation. Now, Mademoiselle Wentworth, if you would permit me to ask, what is this truth the note speaks of? What secret do you fear will be exposed? Clara's gaze dropped to her plate, her fingers twisting the napkin in her lap. I don't know what they mean, she said, her voice unsteady. But in London, years ago, there was an incident. A man died. It wasn't my fault, but people talked. I left to escape the gossip. That's all. Poirot's moustache twitched slightly, a sign that he was not entirely convinced. And this incident, he pressed, it is something the blackmailer knows, something they use to frighten you. Clara nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. I think so, but I swear I'm innocent. I don't know who's doing this or why. Poirot studied her for a moment, his piercing gaze taking in every nuance of her expression. He did not believe she was entirely truthful, but neither did he think she was the mastermind behind the blackmail. Her fear was genuine, but there was something she was withholding, a piece of the puzzle that could unlock the entire mystery. The breakfast ended in uneasy silence. and Poirot excused himself to continue his investigation. He had already added the new blackmail note to his mind map, a mental construct that connected the clues he had gathered thus far. The first cryptic note warning of lies that kill, Emily's attack, the empty safe in Clara's room, Grayson's poisoning, and now this second note targeting Clara directly. Each clue was a thread in a tapestry of deceit, and Poirot was determined to trace them to their source. He began by revisiting the library, where Grayson's body had been found. The room was as it had been the night before, save for the absence of the body, which had been moved to a cold storage room in the manor's basement to await the authorities once the snow cleared. The brandy glass, wiped clean of fingerprints, sat on the table, a silent witness to the crime. Poirot examined it closely, noting the faint residue of cyanide that had been confirmed by Dr. Ramsay's analysis. The poison had been administered with precision, suggesting a killer who was both calculated and familiar with the manor's routines. Poirot's attention then turned to the hidden room he had discovered the previous day, tucked behind a false panel in the library. The old letters and photograph he had found there were still in his possession, locked in his suitcase for safekeeping. The photograph, in particular, intrigued him, a younger Clara, standing beside a man whose face was unfamiliar but whose presence hinted at a connection to the Langley family. The letters, written in a hurried hand, spoke of debts and promises, but none explicitly named Clara or the man in the photograph. Still, Poirot sensed they were linked to the blackmail scheme. Returning to the drawing room, Poirot requested a private audience with Clara. She agreed, though her reluctance was evident in her stiff posture and averted eyes. They sat in a corner of the room, away from the prying ears of the other guests, who had dispersed to their rooms or lingered in tense conversation by the fire. Mademoiselle Wentworth, Poirot began, his tone gentle but firm, you have told me of this incident in London, but I sense there is more to the story. The blackmailer, they know something specific, n'est-ce pas? Something you fear will destroy your engagement to Monsieur Edward. Clara's hands clenched in her lap, her knuckles white. I've told you what I know, she insisted. It was a misunderstanding. A man I knew, James Harrow, died in an accident. We were close, and people assumed the worst. I left London to avoid the scandal, but I didn't do anything wrong. And this James Harrow, Poirot said, leaning forward, he is the man in the photograph I found, yes. Clara's eyes widened, a flicker of panic crossing her face. You found, how did you? I am Hercule Poirot, he said simply, his voice carrying the weight of his reputation. I find what is hidden. Now, tell me, what is the connection between this man and the Langley family? Why does his memory cause you such fear? Clara hesitated, her breath catching. He knew Edward's father, Sir Henry Langley. They had business dealings, but I don't know the details. James never spoke of it, and I didn't ask. After he died, I wanted to forget it all. Poirot nodded, his mind racing. The connection to Sir Henry was a new piece of the puzzle, one that suggested the blackmailer's motives might extend beyond Clara to the Langley estate itself. And the safe in your room, he continued, what was kept there that the blackmailer might want? I don't know, Clara said, her voice breaking. It was empty when I checked after Emily's attack. I kept some jewelry there, but nothing of value to anyone else. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Empty, you say? Yet someone went to great lengths to open it. Pourquoi? What did they hope to find? Clara shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. I don't know, I swear. I just want this to stop. Poirot leaned back, his expression unreadable. He believed Clara's distress was real, but he also suspected she was protecting someone or something. The photograph, the safe, the blackmail notes all pointed to a secret tied to the Langley family, one that Clara was either unwilling or unable to reveal. Leaving Clara to compose herself, Poirot sought out Dr. Ramsay, whose nervous demeanour and possession of cyanide made him a person of interest. He found the doctor in the conservatory, pacing among the wilted plants, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. "Monsieur le Docteur," Poirot said, startling Ramsay. "A word, if you please." Ramsay turned, his face pale. "Monsieur Poirot, I've told you everything I know. The cyanide in my bag was for research, nothing more." "Research? You say?" Poirot's tone was skeptical. "Yet it is a curious coincidence, is it not, that a man dies of cyanide poisoning in the very house where you carry such a substance? Tell me, Doctor, have you received any notes, perhaps, that threaten to expose a secret of your own?" Ramsay's eyes widened, and he took a step back. "Notes? No, nothing like that. I'm just a family friend, here to support Beatrice and Edward." Poirot's mustache twitched again. "A family friend who carries poison and fidgets like a man with much to hide. Nan, Doctor, you must be more forthcoming. What is it you fear?" Ramsay swallowed hard, his gaze darting to the door as if contemplating escape. I treated Sir Henry before he died," he admitted at last. "There were complications. I made a mistake, but it wasn't my fault. Beatrice knows, and she forgave me. That's all." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A mistake, you say? One that could ruin your reputation if it were known. Interessant. And this mistake, it is something the blackmailer might use against you." "I don't know," Ramsay exclaimed, his voice rising. "I haven't received any notes, I swear. But if someone knows, if they're using it against me—" Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. "Enough, Docteur. Your fear betrays you, but I will not press further for now. Return to your duties, but know that Hercule Poirot watches closely." As Ramsay hurried away, Poirot added this new information to his mind map. The doctor's admission suggested another layer of secrets tied to the Langley family, one that might explain the blackmailer's motives. Sir Henry's death, Clara's past, the hidden rumour were pieces of a larger picture, but the central figure remained elusive. The day wore on, with Poirot moving quietly through the manor, observing and questioning. He spoke with Edward, who admitted to a falling out with Grayson over a failed business venture but denied any involvement in his death. He interviewed the servants, who confirmed that the brandy decanter in the library had been untouched before Grayson's death, suggesting the poison was added specifically for him. He even spoke with Lady Beatrice, who maintained a stoic facade but seemed unsettled by the mention of her late husband's business dealings. By evening, the snow had thickened, and the manor felt more like a prison than a home. The guests gathered in the drawing room, their nerves frayed by the mounting tension. Sylvia Marlowe, ever the provocateur, attempted to lighten the mood with a theatrical reading of a poem, but her performance fell flat, her voice tinged with unease. Edward and Clara sat apart, their engagement strained by the events, while Dr. Ramsay avoided eye contact, his hands fidgeting with his glasses. Poirot stood by the fireplace, his presence commanding attention. "Mies, Amos," he said, his voice steady. "The blackmailer is clever, but they are not invisible. They leave traces, notes, lies, fear. I urge you, if you know something, speak now. The truth is the only path to safety. No one spoke, but the silence was heavy with unspoken secrets. Poirot's eyes scanned the room, noting the way Clara clutched Edward's hand, the way Ramsay's gaze flickered to the door, the way Sylvia's smile didn't reach her eyes. The blackmailer was among them, he was certain, and their next move would be the key to unmasking them. As the evening drew to a close, Poirot retired to his room, his mind buzzing with possibilities. He sat at the small desk, sketching his mind map in a notebook, connecting the dots, Clara's past, the photograph, the safe, Grayson's death, Ramsay's cyanide, Sir Henry's business dealings. The blackmailer was manipulating the guests, using their secrets to sow chaos, but for what purpose? Was it money, revenge, or something deeper tied to Ravenwood Manor itself? The answer, Poirot knew, lay in the shadows of the past. He would need to dig deeper to uncover the truth buried beneath the lies. As he closed his notebook, a faint sound reached his ears, a soft creak from the hallway outside his door. He rose, his senses alert, and opened the door to find the corridor empty, save for a single rose petal lying on the floor, its crimson hue stark against the polished wood. Poirot picked it up, his mind racing. A rose petal, a symbol of beauty and secrecy, left as a message or a warning. The blackmailer was close, and their game was far from over. With a determined nod, Poirot returned to his room, his resolve strengthened. The little grey cells would not rest until the truth was revealed. The night passed without further incident, but the manor remained a powder keg, ready to ignite with the next revelation. Poirot knew that time was running out. The blackmailer's shadow loomed large, and with it the threat of another death. He would need to act swiftly to unravel the lies before they buried the truth forever. Chapter 8. A web of alibis. The snow continued to fall outside Ravenwood Manor, blanketing the estate in a suffocating silence that mirrored the tension within. Hercule Poirot stood by the tall windows of the drawing-room, his hands clasped behind, his back, his sharp eyes scanning the swirling flakes as if they might reveal the secrets buried in the house. The murder of Major Harold Grayson weighed heavily on the gathered guests, and the air was thick with suspicion. Each person in the room, Medward Langley, Clara Wentworth, Sylvia Marlowe, Dr. Victor Ramsay, Lady Beatrice Langley, and the now recovered maid, Emily, carried the burden of their own secrets, and Poirot knew that the truth lay tangled in a web of alibis, half-truths, and carefully constructed lies. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the room. Poirot turned from the window, his moustache twitching slightly as he surveyed the group. They sat in a semicircle, their faces a gallery of unease. Edward's jaw was tight, his eyes darting to Clara, who sat poised but pale, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Sylvia Marlowe, ever the actress, lounged with a forced air of nonchalance, though her fingers betrayed her, twisting a silk handkerchief. Dr. Ramsay's nervous tic had worsened, his foot tapping an erratic rhythm against the polished floor. Lady Beatrice, regal and composed, stared into the fire as if it held answers she could not face. And Emily, still shaken from her attack, sat on the edge of her chair, her eyes downcast, avoiding Poirot's gaze. Mies Amos, Poirot began, his voice calm but commanding, cutting through the oppressive silence. The death of Major Grayson is no accident, no impulsive act of passion. It is a murder most calculated, a crime woven with precision. The killer walks among us, and their alibis est une facade, are masked to hide the truth. Today we shall unravel this web. A murmur rippled through the group. Edward shifted uncomfortably, his hand brushing Clara's, who gave him a fleeting, reassuring smile. Sylvia let out a short, brittle laugh. Really, Monsieur Poirot, must you make this so theatrical? We're all trapped here by the storm. Surely you don't suspect one of us? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Mademoiselle Marlowe, in a house such as this, where secrets fester like damp in the walls, everyone is a suspect until the little grey cells prove otherwise. Let us begin with the alibis, Nan. We shall see who was where and when. At the moment Major Grayson met his unfortunate end. He paced slowly before the group, his polished shoes clicking softly on the hardwood floor. The facts, they are simple. Major Grayson was found dead in the library at approximately 11 o'clock last night, poisoned by cyanide in his brandy. The glass, it was wiped clean of fingerprints, detail most deliberate. The library door was locked from the inside, but the key was found in the Major's pocket, suggesting the killer exited through the French windows, which were ajar despite the storm. Now, let us hear your accounts. Edward spoke first, his voice steady but his eyes betraying a flicker of unease. I was in my study, going over estate papers. Clara was with me for part of the evening, but she retired early, around 10. I stayed until nearly midnight, alone. Poirot tilted his head, and you saw no one, heard nothing. The library, it is not far from your study, Monsieur Langley. Edward's jaw tightened. I heard nothing unusual. The manor is large, and the storm was loud. I was focused on my work. Clara nodded, her voice soft but clear. I can confirm. Edward was in his study when I left him at 10. I went to my room to read. Emily brought me tea around 10:30, and I didn't leave after that. Poirot's gaze shifted to Emily, who flinched slightly under his scrutiny. Mademoiselle Emily, you brought the tea, oui. And then Emily's voice was barely above. A whisper. I returned to the servants' quarters. I was there all night, sir. I swear it. Poirot made a small, thoughtful sound, his fingers brushing his moustache. And you, Mademoiselle Marlowe? Sylvia tossed her head, her auburn curls catching the firelight. I was in my room, practicing lines for my next play. I had no reason to wander about in this draughty old house. I went to bed at perhaps 10:30, alone. Poirot asked, his tone neutral but piercing. Sylvia's eyes narrowed, but she held his gaze. Of course, alone. What are you implying, Monsieur Poirot? Nothing, mademoiselle, merely seeking clarity. Poirot turned to Dr. Ramsay, whose tapping foot had grown more frantic. And you, doctor, where were you when Major Grayson drank his fatal brandy? Dr. Ramsay cleared his throat, his hands twisting together. I was in the billiards room, reading a medical journal. I often find it hard to sleep in unfamiliar places, so I stayed up late. I saw no one after dinner. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. And you, Lady Beatrice? Beatrice lifted her chin, her voice steady despite the strain in her eyes. I retired to my rooms after dinner. I was exhausted from the day's events and the storm's arrival. I heard nothing until the scream woke me when poor Emily was found. Poirot paused, letting the silence stretch. He walked to the center of the room, pulling a small notebook from his pocket. Let us examine these alibis, Ms. Amos. Each of you claims to have been alone, yet a man is dead, and the cyanide, it does not administer itself. Let us test the strength of this web. He began with Edward. Monsieur Langley, you say you were in your study. Yet the butler, Mr. Hawkins, reports seeing you in the East Wing corridor near the library at 10:45. How do you explain this contradiction? Edward's face paled, but he recovered quickly. Hawkins must be mistaken. I didn't leave my study until after 11, when I heard the commotion about Emily. Poirot's eyes narrowed. The butler, he is most precise. He noted the time because he was checking the clocks for the night. Curious, Nan, that your memory differs. Edward opened his mouth to protest, but Poirot raised a hand, moving on to Clara. Mademoiselle Wentworth, you say Emily brought you tea at 10:30. Yet the kitchen staff confirm Emily was helping with dishes until 11. How could she bring tea at the time you claim? Clara's composure faltered, her fingers tightening in her lap. I must have been mistaken about the time. It was late, and I was tired. Poirot's moustache twitched. A small mistake, perhaps, but in a murder investigation, every minute counts. He turned to Emily. And you, mademoiselle, you claim to have been in the servants' quarters. Yet a maid saw you near the library stairs at 10:50. You were not in your quarters, were you? Emily's eyes filled with tears. I don't remember. My head, it's still fuzzy from the attack. I might have been fetching something for Miss Clara. Poirot's gaze softened, but only slightly. The mind, it plays tricks, but the truth, it remains. We shall return to you, mademoiselle. He pivoted to Sylvia, who met his gaze with defiance. Mademoiselle Marlowe, your room, it is on the second floor. Yet I found a torn piece of silk in the garden, near the French windows of the library. It matches the dress you wore last night. How did it come to be there if you were in your room? Sylvia's smile faltered, her hand clutching the handkerchief. That's absurd. I haven't been in the garden since we arrived. Someone must have taken it, or it's a coincidence. Poirot raised an eyebrow. A coincidence, mademoiselle? Poirot does not believe in coincidences where murder is concerned. Finally, he turned to Dr. Ramsay, whose face was now slick with sweat. Doctor, your medical bag contains a vial of cyanide, a most unusual item for a house call. You claim it is for research, yet you were in the billiards room, not a laboratory. And the footman reports hearing raised voices from the billiards room at 10:30, though you say you were alone. Dr. Ramsay's hands shook. I don't know what you mean. I was reading, as I said. The footman must be confused. As for the cyanide, it's purely professional. I would never. Enough, Poirot said sharply, cutting him off. Each of you spins a tale, but the threads, they do not hold. The alibis, they contradict the evidence, the witnesses, the very logic of the situation. Someone in this room knows more than they say, and Poirot will find the truth. The room fell silent, the crackling fire the only sound. Poirot paced again, his mind working furiously. He stopped abruptly, his eyes lighting up as if struck by a sudden thought. The library, it is the key. The French windows, they were ajar, yet the snow outside showed no footprints. This suggests the killer did not leave through the windows, despite appearances. The locked door, the key in the Major's pocket, is a trick, a misdirection. The killer was in the library with Major Grayson, and they left through the door, locking it behind them with a spare key. Edward frowned. But how? The key was in Grayson's pocket. Poirot smiled faintly. A second key, Monsieur Langley. Ravenwood Manor is old, and old houses, they have many keys. The killer used one to lock the door, then placed the original in the major's pocket to create the illusion of a locked room. But we shall test this theory. He turned to the butler, Mr. Hawkins, who stood discreetly by the door. Monsieur Hawkins, please bring the spare keys from the housekeeper's office. We shall see if one fits the library door. Hawkins nodded and left, returning moments later with a ring of keys. Poirot took them, his fingers deftly selecting one that matched the library's lock. He held it up, his eyes gleaming. Voila! The second key. The locked room. It is no mystery at all. The guests exchanged uneasy glances. Clara spoke, her voice trembling slightly. But that doesn't prove who did it, Monsieur Poirot. Anyone could have used that key. Precisement, mademoiselle, Poirot said. But it narrows the possibilities. The killer is someone who knew of the spare keys, someone familiar with the manor's secrets. And now we return to the alibis. Poirot resumed his pacing, his voice growing sharper. Monsieur Langley, your presence in the East Wing contradicts your claim. Mademoiselle Wentworth, your timeline with Emily is impossible. Mademoiselle Emily, you were seen where you should not have been. Mademoiselle Marlowe, your dress betrays your movements. And Dr. Ramsay, your cyanide and your nervous demeanor, they speak volumes. Each of you has a thread in this web, but who is the spider? He stopped, his gaze sweeping the room. Let us consider motive. Major Grayson, he was a man with enemies. Monsieur Langley, you argued with him over a business deal gone sour. Mademoiselle Wentworth, he threatened your engagement with accusations of scandal. Mademoiselle Marlowe, you and the Major had a history, did you not? A disagreement over a theatrical investment, perhaps. And Dr. Ramsay, your medical bag suggests knowledge of poisons, and your agitation suggests guilt. Even you, Lady Beatrice, you stood to lose if Grayson exposed a family secret. Beatrice's eyes flashed. That's preposterous, Monsieur Poirot. I had no quarrel with Harold. Perhaps Poirot said, but secrets, they bind us all. And someone in this room sought to silence Major Grayson before he could reveal theirs. The tension in the room was palpable, each guest avoiding the other's eyes. Poirot continued, his voice now soft but relentless. The cyanide, it was not taken from the doctor's bag at random. It was chosen with care, administered with precision. The killer knew Grayson would drink brandy after dinner, as was his habit. They knew the library was his retreat. They planned every detail, including the wiping of the glass to remove their fingerprints. This is not the act of an amateur, but of one who weaves lies as skillfully as a tapestry. Sylvia stood abruptly, her handkerchief falling to the floor. This is unbearable. You accuse us all, Monsieur Poirot, but you have no proof. You're fishing, hoping one of us will crack under your theatrics. Poirot's smile was cold. Mademoiselle Marlowe, the proof, it is in the details. The torn silk, the missing footprints, the second key, these are not theatrics, but facts. And facts, they do not lie. People do. Sylvia sat down, her face pale. Poirot turned to the group as a whole. Let us now consider the possibility of collusion. Two or more of you, working together, could create this web of alibis. One to distract, one to poison, one to lock the door. Is this not possible? Edward's voice was sharp. That's absurd. Why would any of us conspire to kill Grayson? He was difficult, yes, but murder. Poirot raised a finger. Motive, Monsieur Langley, is often hidden in the heart. Greed, revenge, Fear, these are powerful forces. And in this house, they are all present. The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. Poirot's eyes followed the sparks. His mind racing. He knew the killer was watching, waiting for a misstep. But Poirot, he did not misstep. He returned to his notebook, flipping to a page covered in neat, precise lines, a mind map, connecting names, times, and clues. Let us revisit the timeline, he said. Dinner ended at 9:30. Major Grayson retired to the library at 10. The Scream Millie's attack was heard at 11:15, after the murder. This suggests the killer acted between 10 and 11, then staged Emily's attack to create chaos and divert suspicion. But why attack Emily? To silence her, perhaps, or to make her appear a victim. Emily's head snapped up, her voice trembling. I don't know anything, sir. I swear, I don't remember. Poirot's eyes softened, but his voice remained. Firm, mademoiselle. Your memory, it will return. And when it does, it may save you or condemn you. He turned to Dr. Ramsay. Doctor, your cyanide vial. It is missing a small amount, consistent with the dose that killed Major Grayson. You claim it is for research, but where is your laboratory? Why bring such a dangerous substance to a weekend gathering? Dr. Ramsay's face crumpled. I told you, it's professional. I study toxicology. I didn't kill anyone. Poirot nodded, but his eyes were unrelenting. And yet, your bag was left unattended in the billiards room, where anyone could have taken the cyanide. Convenient, Nan. He moved to Sylvia. Mademoiselle Marlowe, the silk from your dress, it was found near the French windows. You claim you were in your room, but the garden, it tells a different story. Were you meeting someone? Or perhaps disposing of something? Sylvia's voice was icy. I told you, I was in my room. Your scrap of silk proves nothing. Poirot's smile was faint but knowing. We shall see, mademoiselle. The truth, it has a way of revealing itself. He turned to Clara and Edward. Mademoiselle Wentworth, Monsieur Langley, your alibis depend on each other, yet both are contradicted by witnesses. Were you protecting one another, or hiding something more? Clara's eyes filled with tears. We're in love, Monsieur Poirot. We wouldn't hurt anyone. Poirot's expression was unreadable. Love, mademoiselle, it can be a motive as powerful as hate. Finally, he addressed Lady Beatrice. Madame, you claim to have been in your rooms, yet the housekeeper saw you in the hall near the library at 10:20. You did not mention this. Why? Beatrice's composure wavered. I couldn't sleep. I walked the halls briefly, then returned to my room. It was nothing. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Nothing, madame. In a house where a man was murdered, nothing is nothing. He stepped back, addressing the group as a whole. Each of you has a flaw in your story, a thread that unravels. The killer, they are clever, but not clever enough. Poirot sees the pattern, and soon the spider will be caught in their own web. The room was silent, the weight of his words pressing down on them. Poirot closed his notebook with a snap, his eyes gleaming with determination. For now, Mies, Amos, we rest, but tomorrow we dig deeper. The truth, it cannot hide forever. As the guests dispersed, their faces etched with fear and suspicion, Poirot lingered by the fire, his mind map burning in his thoughts. The alibis were a puzzle, each piece misaligned, but he knew that with time and his little grey cells, the picture would become clear. The killer had spun a deadly game of lies, but Hercule Poirot was a master at unraveling them. The night deepened, and the snow continued to fall, sealing Ravenwood Manor in its icy grip. Somewhere in the house, the killer watched, their heart pounding, knowing that Poirot was closing in. Chapter 9. The second victim. The snow fell heavier now, blanketing Ravenwood Manor in an oppressive silence, as if the estate itself held its breath. The air inside was thick with fear, the kind that clings to the skin and quickens the pulse. Sylvia Marlowe's absence at breakfast had gone unnoticed at first. Her penchant for dramatics often kept her in her room until noon. But when a maid, sent to check on her, returned with a scream that shattered the morning's quiet, the household descended into chaos. Poirot stood in the garden, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the snow, his breath visible in the frigid air. Before him lay Sylvia, her vibrant red hair splayed against the white ground, her throat bruised with the unmistakable marks of strangulation. Her eyes, wide and lifeless, stared upward as if accusing the heavens. A cryptic message was scrawled in the snow beside her: "Lies bury truth." The words, uneven and hurried, were already half covered by fresh flakes, but their meaning chilled Poirot more than the winter wind. Captain Hastings, ever loyal, stood at Poirot's side, his face pale. "Good Lord, Poirot," he whispered. "Another one. This is madness. Who could do such a thing?" Poirot's eyes, sharp as ever, scanned the scene. Madness, mon ami, or method. The killer is bold, but not reckless. This message, this is no accident. It is a challenge. He crouched, careful not to disturb the snow, and examined the marks around Sylvia's neck. Strangled, yes, but with force and precision. The killer was strong, determined, and personal. This was no impulse. The other guests gathered at the garden's edge, their faces a mix of horror and suspicion. Lady Beatrice Langley clutched her shawl, her composure fraying like old silk. Edward, her son, stood rigid, his jaw tight, while Clara Wentworth, his fiancée, clung to his arm, her eyes darting nervously. Dr. Victor Ramsay, the family friend, hovered at the back, his hands trembling as he adjusted his spectacles. The servants, huddled together, whispered among themselves, their fear palpable. Poirot rose, brushing snow from his coat. Messieurs, et mesdames, returned to the drawing-room. This is a crime scene, and I must work undisturbed. Hastings, ensure no one leaves the manor. As the group shuffled back inside, Poirot's mind was already at work, his little grey cells weaving a tapestry of clues. Sylvia's death was no isolated act, it was linked to Major Grayson's murder in the library, poisoned just 2 nights prior, the cryptic note in the drawing-room, the blackmail threats. The torn letter in Emily's hand pointed to a web of deceit that grew tighter with each passing hour. Inside, Poirot began his investigation in earnest. The garden was an unlikely place for murder, exposed yet isolated by the storm. The snow, though a hindrance, was also a canvas. Footprints led from the manor's side door to Sylvia's body, but they were muddled, overlapping, as if the killer had tried to obscure their path. Poirot noted the size and depth, likely a man's boots, but the snow's drift made certainty impossible. He followed the trail back to the door, finding it unlocked, a detail that raised his suspicions. Someone had planned this dot in the drawing room. The guests sat in uneasy silence. Poirot entered, his presence commanding attention. "Mademoiselle Sylvia Marlowe is dead," he announced, his voice steady but grave. "Strangled, in the garden, with a message left beside her." I must know where each of you was between midnight and 6 this morning. Clara spoke first, her voice trembling. I was in my room, asleep. Edward can confirm he was with me until late. Edward nodded, though his eyes avoided Poirot's gaze. Dr. Ramsay cleared his throat. I was in my study, reviewing medical notes. The storm kept me awake. His hands fidgeted, betraying his nerves. Lady Beatrice, her voice icy, said, I retired early. My maid can vouch for me. Poirot's moustache twitched. And yet, Madame, your maid was seen in the kitchen at 3 a.m., not attending you. Alibis, it seems, are as fragile as the snow outside. He turned to the servants, questioning Emily, Clara's maid, who had recovered from her earlier attack, but remained pale. I was in my room, sir, she said softly. I heard nothing. Poirot. Eyes narrowed. Nothing, mademoiselle. A scream, a struggle, in the dead of night, and you heard nothing. Emily looked away, her hands twisting in her lap. The interrogation continued, but the alibis were a tangle of contradictions. Poirot retreated to his room, where he spread out his mind map, a sheet of paper covered in lines, names and clues, each connected by his meticulous logic. Sylvia's death added new threads. Her diary, found in her room, was a treasure trove. Its pages detailed her suspicion of a family lie that threatened Ravenwood Manor's future. She had written of overhearing Edward and Major Grayson arguing over money, of Clara's secretive past, and of Dr. Ramsay's odd behavior around the safe in Clara's room. Poirot paced, his mind racing. Sylvia had been a threat, her sharp tongue and sharper mind too close to the truth. But whose truth? The message in the snow lies, buried truth, suggested the killer was protecting a secret, one tied to the Langley family. The will Poirot had glimpsed in the hidden room hinted at an illegitimate heir, a shadow over the estate's inheritance. Could Sylvia have known about this? Had she confronted the wrong person? He returned to the garden, now cordoned off by Hastings. The snow had stopped, leaving the scene eerily pristine. Poirot examined the message again, noting the handwriting's slant, the pressure of the strokes. It was deliberate, meant to be seen. He searched the area, finding a silk scarf half buried nearby, its pattern matching one Sylvia had worn at dinner. Had she dropped it in a struggle, or had the killer planted it? Back inside, Poirot questioned the servants more closely. The gardener, a grizzled man named Thomas, admitted to seeing a figure in the garden around midnight, but couldn't identify them. It was dark, sir, and the snow was heavy, he said. I thought it was one of the guests, maybe a walk. Poirot's suspicions deepened. The killer had chosen the garden for a reason: its isolation, its exposure. It was a stage, and Sylvia's death was a performance meant to warn or distract. He turned his attention to the diary again, reading late into the night. Sylvia had written of a confrontation with Clara, accusing her of hiding something about her past. Clara had laughed it off, but Sylvia noted her unease. Another entry mentioned Dr. Ramsay's late-night visits to the library, where Grayson was later found dead. The next morning, Poirot gathered the guests again. Mademoiselle Marlowe's diary, he said, holding it aloft, reveals much. She suspected a lie at the heart of this family, one that connects to Major Grayson's death and now her own. Who among you feared her knowledge? Clara's face paled, but she said nothing. Edward stood, his voice sharp. This is absurd, Poirot. Sylvia was a gossip, nothing more. She saw conspiracies everywhere. Perhaps, Poirot replied, but Gossips often stumble upon truths. Her diary mentions a family lie tied to Ravenwood Manor. Tell me, Monsieur Langley, what lie might that be? Edward hesitated, then sat, his hands clenched. Lady Beatrice intervened. Enough, Monsieur Poirot. My family has no secrets worth killing for. Poirot smiled faintly. Madame, in my experience, every family has secrets, and some are deadly. The day wore on, with Poirot piecing together more clues. The silk scarf was confirmed as Sylvia's, but its position suggested it had been placed after her death. The footprints in the garden were too muddled to trace, but a broken twig near the side door hinted at a struggle. Poirot's mind map grew denser, lines connecting Sylvia's diary, the blackmail notes, and the hidden room's contents. He interviewed Dr. Ramsay again, noting his increasing agitation. The cyanide in your bag, Dr. Poirot said, was it truly for research, or did you supply it to someone else? Ramsay's face flushed. I told you, it's for experiments. I'm a scientist, not a murderer. Yet, Poirot countered, your bag was in the library the night Grayson died, and Sylvia suspected you of something. What did she know? Ramsay stammered, then fell silent. Poirot let the silence linger, knowing it would unsettle him. By evening, the manor was a pressure cooker of suspicion. Clara and Edward argued in hushed tones. Lady Beatrice secluded herself, and the servants avoided eye contact. Poirot, undeterred, revisited the hidden room, finding a locked box he hadn't noticed before. With Hastings' help, he pried it open, revealing a locket with a portrait of a young woman resembling Clara. A note inside read, "To my daughter, may you claim what is yours." The discovery electrified Poirot. The illegitimate heir was real, and Clara was connected to them, perhaps even the heir herself. But why kill Sylvia? Had she uncovered Clara's true identity, or was someone else protecting the secret? Poirot spent hours refining his mind map, adding the locket, the note, and Sylvia's diary entries. The murders were linked to the Langley estate, but the motive remained elusive. Was it greed, revenge, or something deeper? The blackmailers. Shadow loomed large, manipulating events from within the manor. As night fell, Poirot sat by the fire, his mind a whirl of possibilities. Sylvia's death was a turning point, a bold move by a killer who thrived on deception. The message in the snow was a taunt, daring Poirot to unravel the lies. He closed his eyes, letting his grey cells work, knowing the truth was close but buried beneath a deadly game of lies. Chapter 10. The Hidden Heir. The snow continued to blanket Ravenwood Manor in an unyielding shroud, muffling the world outside and sealing the inhabitants within a cocoon of suspicion and dread. Hercule Poirot stood alone in the library, the scene of Major Grayson's murder, his sharp eyes scanning the shelves as if they might whisper secrets of their own. The discovery of the hidden room in Chapter 6 had ignited a spark in his methodical mind, and now, with the photograph of Clara Wentworth alongside an unknown man clutched in his gloved hand, he felt the threads of the mystery tightening into a discernible pattern. His little grey cells were alight, piecing together the fragments of deceit that permeated the manor like a fog. The morning had dawned grey and heavy, the storm showing no signs of abating. The guests, confined by the weather and the weight of 2 murders, moved through the manor with the wariness of prey. Poirot, however, was undeterred. The hidden room, uncovered behind a false panel in the east wing, had yielded not only the photograph but also a collection of yellowed letters, their ink faded but legible. These letters, penned by the late Lord Langley, hinted at a scandal buried deep in the family's past, a scandal that could shift the very foundation of Ravenwood Manor's ownership. The photograph, showing Clara with a man whose features bore a striking resemblance to the late lord, had set Poirot's mind racing. Could Clara be connected to this secret? And if so, how did it tie to the murders of Major Grayson and Sylvia Marlowe? Poirot's first task was to confront Lady Beatrice Langley, the matriarch whose composure had begun to crack under the strain of the weekend's events. He found her in the conservatory, surrounded by wilting orchids that seemed to mirror the decay of the family secrets. Beatrice sat rigidly, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the snow-covered glass panes. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and unspoken truths. Madame Poirot began, his voice soft but commanding. "It is time, I think, for the truth to emerge from the shadows. The photograph, I have found it, suggests a connection. Most intriguing. A man, perhaps a relative of your late husband, Nan, and Mademoiselle Clara. She is linked to him. I must know what you conceal." Beatrice's lips tightened, her fingers twitching slightly. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice low, "you tread on dangerous ground. My husband's affairs were his own, and they died with him." Poirot tilted his head, his moustache twitching as he considered her words. "And yet, madame, the dead have a way of speaking through the living. The letters I have found, they mention an heir, one not acknowledged in the public records of Ravenwood Manor, an illegitimate child, perhaps, one who might claim what is now your son's inheritance." Beatrice's eyes flickered with something akin to fear, but she quickly masked it with indignation. "You presume too much, Monsieur Poirot. My husband was a good man, but not without flaws. If there were such a child, it is no concern of mine or of this house." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "Perhaps, madame, but the photograph tells a different story. And the will, yes, I have found it too, hidden in the same room. It speaks of provisions for a child born out of wedlock. If this child lives, they could challenge Edward's claim to Ravenwood Manor. Tell me, do you know of such a person?" Beatrice rose abruptly, her silk gown rustling. "This conversation is over, Monsieur Poirot. I will not have my family's name dragged through the mud by your speculations." Poirot watched her retreat, her steps quick and unsteady. He did not pursue her. There was no need. Her reaction had confirmed what the letters and photographs suggested. The secret of an illegitimate heir was real, and Beatrice feared its exposure. But who was this heir, and how did they connect to the murders? Poirot's mind returned to Clara Wentworth, the enigmatic fiancée whose past was shrouded in mystery. The photograph placed her at the heart of this enigma, and Poirot resolved to probe deeper. He sought out Clara next, finding her in the drawing-room where she sat alone, a book unopened in her lap. Her face was pale, her eyes distant, as if she were wrestling with thoughts too heavy to voice. Poirot approached with his usual courtesy, though his eyes missed nothing the slight tremble in her hands, the way her gaze darted to the door as if expecting an interruption. "Mademoiselle Wentworth," he said, settling into a chair opposite her, "I must speak with you about a matter most delicate. The photograph, I have found it, shows you with a man who bears a resemblance to the late Lord Langley. I wonder, perhaps, if you might enlighten me about this connection." Clara's eyes widened, but she quickly composed herself. "I don't know what you mean, Monsieur Poirot. I've never met Lord Langley. He died before I ever came to Ravenwood." Poirot's smile was gentle but unrelenting. "And yet, the photograph does not lie. The man in it, he is not a stranger to you, I think. And the letters, they speak of a child, an heir who might claim this estate. If you are connected to this heir, mademoiselle, it is best to speak now. The truth, it has a way of emerging, no matter how deeply it is buried. Clara's hands clenched around the book, her knuckles white. "You're mistaken," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just Edward's fiancée. I have no claim to anything here." Poirot leaned forward, his voice softening. "Mademoiselle, 2 people are dead. Major Grayson, poisoned in this very house. Mademoiselle Marlowe, strangled in the garden. Both, I believe, were killed to protect a secret that may involve you. If you are innocent, as you claim, then help me. Tell me who this man is, and why you are in a photograph with him." For a moment, Clara seemed on the verge of speaking, her lips parting as if to confess. But then her expression hardened, and she stood abruptly. "I have nothing to say, Monsieur Poirot. If you'll excuse me, I need to rest." As she left the room, Poirot's eyes narrowed. Clara's refusal to speak only deepened his suspicion. The photograph, the letters, the will, they all pointed to a hidden truth, one that Clara was either protecting or exploiting. But there was another possibility, one that Poirot's mind was beginning to explore. What if Clara herself was the illegitimate heir? The thought was audacious, but it fit the pieces of the puzzle. Her secretive nature, her insistence on privacy, the blackmail notes that seemed to target her pastel could be explained. If she were the child mentioned in the will. Poirot returned to the hidden room, determined to uncover more evidence. The space was cramped, its walls lined with dusty shelves that held forgotten relics of the Langley family. He examined the letters again, noting the dates and the careful phrasing of Lord Langley's words. One letter, dated 25 years prior, was particularly revealing. "My dearest Margaret, the child must remain a secret for the sake of the family. I have provided for her in my will, but none must know of her existence. Ravenwood must pass to Edward, as is proper, but I cannot abandon my duty to her. She is with a trusted friend in London, safe for now. I pray you understand my actions, though they pain me." The letter was unsigned, but the handwriting matched others penned by Lord Langley. The mention of a daughter, hidden in London, sent a thrill through Poirot. Clara, now in her could easily fit the timeline, but who was Margaret? A mistress, a confidant. And why had Clara come to Ravenwood, engaged to Edward, if she was indeed the hidden heir? Poirot's search yielded one more clue, a small locket tucked inside a velvet-lined box. Inside was a miniature portrait of a woman who bore a striking resemblance to Clara, though older and with a softer expression. The locket's clasp was engraved with the initials M.W. Margaret Wentworth. Perhaps, if Clara was her daughter, the pieces began to align. Clara's engagement to Edward could be a calculated move to secure her claim to Ravenwood, or perhaps a desperate attempt to escape her past. As evening fell, Poirot gathered his notes and updated his mind map, a sprawling web of connections that now included the photograph, the letters, the will, and the locket. Each clue was a thread, and at the center sat Clara Wentworth, her motives obscured by layers of deception. But Poirot knew the killer was still at large, and the murders of Grayson and Marlowe suggested a ruthless determination to keep the secret buried. Was Clara the mastermind, or was she a pawn in a larger game? He decided to test his theory by observing the other guests, particularly Edward Langley. If Clara was the hidden heir, Edward's claim to Ravenwood was at risk. Had he discovered her secret? Was his charming demeanor a facade, hiding a motive for murder? Poirot found Edward in the billiard room, idly rolling a cue ball across the table. The young man's face was drawn, his earlier confidence replaced by a nervous energy. "Monsieur Langley," Poirot said, entering the room, "a word, if you please. The events of this weekend, they weigh heavily on you, Nan. The death of Major Grayson, the loss of Mademoiselle Marlowe, and now, perhaps, a threat to your inheritance." Edward's hand froze on the cue ball, his eyes narrowing. "What are you implying, Poirot? I've done nothing wrong. Grayson was a bitter old man, and Sylvia, well, she was trouble, always stirring things up. I just want this nightmare to end." Poirot nodded, his expression neutral. "And yet, monsieur, there is the matter of the will, a document that suggests Ravenwood may not be yours by right. If there is another heir, one with a claim stronger than yours, what then?" Edward's face paled, but he laughed, a hollow sound. "You're chasing ghosts, Poirot. My father's will is clear. Ravenwood is mine. Clara and I will marry, and this estate will be our home. No one can take that from me." Poirot tilted his head, studying Edward's reaction. "Perhaps, monsieur. But the truth, it is like the snow outside, covers all, but it cannot hide forever. If you know of this other heir, it is best to speak now." Edward slammed the cue ball against the table's edge, sending it spinning. "I don't know what you're talking about, Poirot. Leave me alone." As Edward stormed out, Poirot's mind churned. Edward's defensiveness suggested he knew more than he admitted, but his fear seemed genuine. Was he protecting Clara, or was he unaware of her true identity? The possibility that Edward was complicit in the murders could not be dismissed. But Poirot needed more evidence. The day wore on, with Poirot moving between the guests, probing their reactions and refining his mind map. Dr. Victor Ramsay, whose medical bag had contained cyanide, remained a figure of interest. His nervous demeanor and vague explanations suggested he was hiding something, but was it murder or merely complicity? Poirot cornered him in the study, where Ramsay was poring over a medical journal, his hands trembling. "Dr. Ramsay," Poirot said, his tone mild but firm, "the vial of cyanide in your possession, it is most curious, Nan. You claim it is for research, yet Major Grayson died by that very poison. And now, with the discovery of certain documents, I wonder if you know more about the Langley family than you have revealed." Ramsay's face flushed, his eyes darting to the door. "I told you, Monsieur Poirot, the cyanide was for a study on toxicology. I had no reason to harm Grayson or anyone else. As for the Langley family, I've been their physician for years. I know nothing of their private affairs." Poirot's moustache twitched. "And yet, Doctor, you were close to Lord Langley. Close enough, perhaps, to know of a child born outside his marriage. A child whose existence might threaten the stability of this household." Ramsay's hands clenched, his journal slipping to the floor. "You're grasping at straws, Poirot. I'm a doctor, not a conspirator. If you have accusations, make them plainly." Poirot smiled, unruffled. "In due time, Doctor. But know this, the truth. It is like a patient under your care. It cannot be ignored, no matter how much one wishes to avoid it." As Ramsay stammered a reply, Poirot left the study, his mind racing. Ramsay's nervousness suggested he was entangled in the web of secrets, but whether as a perpetrator or a pawn remained unclear. The day's investigations had confirmed one thing: the hidden heir was the key to the murders, and Clara Wentworth was at the heart of the mystery. That night, as the manor settled into an uneasy silence, Poirot sat by the fire in his room, his mind map spread before him. The photograph, the letters, the will, the locket all pointed to Clara as the potential heir, but the murders suggested a deeper motive. Was she protecting her claim to Ravenwood, or was someone else using her secret to manipulate the events? The blackmail notes, the attack on Emily, the deaths of Grayson and Marlowall were pieces of a puzzle that Poirot was determined to solve. As the clock struck midnight, a soft knock at his door startled him. It was Emily, Clara's maid, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. "Monsieur Poirot," she whispered, "I need to tell you something. It's about Clarande, the safe. I took something from it, but I didn't mean any harm. Please, you must believe me." Poirot's eyes gleamed in the firelight. "Come, Mademoiselle Emily," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Tell me everything, the truth. It is the only way to end this deadly game of lies." Emily's confession would have to wait until the next chapter, but for now, Poirot felt the noose tightening around the killer. The hidden heir was no longer a shadow, but a figure stepping into the light, and with each revelation, Poirot was closer to unmasking the mastermind behind Ravenwood Manor's deadly secrets. The snow continued to fall, but Poirot knew the storm within the manor was far from over. The truth, like the dawn, was inevitable, and he would see it break through the lies before the weekend was done.